so I guess with that, like the manifesting generator, what you were saying about how, what did you say? Wow, that was literally 3 seconds ago. What's going on in the vortex right now? Something feels off. I don't know what it is.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot going on.
Is that something you've tapped into recently? Like what's happening?
Yeah, I just feel like what's happening is we're going through a humongous, like you used the word vortex, and that's perfect. It feels like a huge, almost like whirlpool, like a funnel, almost like the dream is breaking down and a whole bunch of shit is getting sucked down the drain and it's getting pulled apart as it does. I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in the world in terms of like the really intense summer of fires that pretty sure are not naturally organic occurring fires.
Well, when you say that, real quick, when
But
you
I
say that,
know,
do you mean like nefarious human actors, or is it like an energetic, spiritual fire?
yeah, so on it's both, because in the third and fourth dimensional level, it's playing out through a narrative of a polarity between forces of evil and forces of benevolence, I guess. Forces of selfish self-servingness and forces of service to the whole of creation. And so on the boots on the ground level for us as humans, all of that is true, where there are nefarious acts happening and direct energy weapons being used and like fires being set that aren't just natural organic occurrences. But then at the higher dimensional level, I perceive that it is more like the dream that we are all in. Like I describe it as we're characters in the dream of a great dreaming mind. And the dream is dissolving to turn into a different dream, the same way that our dreams do. Like that we can have a whole story arc playing in our dream, and then all of a sudden it dissolves and turns into something else. And most of the time when we wake up, we're not really aware of that transitional period. But I think that's what's happening here. And that's what is, I don't know if you've heard anybody talking about the ascension from 3D to 5D. I'm sure you have, because that's a lot of people talk about it. But I think that is what the ascension is, and like almost like a new, like newer things that people talk about is it's a new version of the dream. That's how I perceive it. So both of those things
A
are
new
true.
version of the dream. I know I've heard a lot about this in regards to the word that I always hesitate to speak because I feel like my platform's not big enough to completely get demonetized yet. So the C word, if you know what I'm talking about, where
Yeah.
that happened 2 years ago. I've always kind of heard that this was like, and I want to be respectful about this because I know this can be very triggering for people. It was kind of this purging, if you will, of negative energy that, came in the form of negative energy, but it helped almost make space energetically for new things. Is this kind of what we're seeing like round 2, but in terms of force, like in your opinion, of course, is this what we're seeing in terms of, Maui's on fire, Canada's on fire? Is that what is happening right now?
Yeah, I think a purging's an amazing analogy. I really do, because like if you think of a literal forest fire, like a natural organic occurring one, it is a purge. It's the clearing away of a lot of old growth that otherwise doesn't, it takes a long time for it to fall on its own, which creates space for new growth. So it's a regeneration of the forest, which doesn't actually die. It just gets like raised down at the, the surface level, but all of the life continues, like all of the root systems are still there, right? So then new growth occurs. And I feel like that is what's happening. Again, like likewise with a ton of sensitivity for the effect that it has had on a lot of people. But so I got this message last year while I was on an acupuncture table and I had the needles in me. I got this like, I call it a download. So it just was a direct knowing and a direct answer to a question that I had. And my question was, why does reality not feel real right now? Because it really didn't to me at the time. And the answer I got is that we're already on the ships. And I really had to break that down because I personally don't even know what ships are, and I don't even fully believe in ships. Now I kind of understand them better, but at the time I was like, what the hell does that mean? But the imagery and understanding I got to accompany it is that we think we're on Earth, but we're actually on these ships, which are just, a ship is a symbolic, it's a symbol of a vehicle that moves us from one location to another, right? So we're on the ships and we are in these medically induced coma-like states, and we are being tended to by beings that love us very much and are totally benevolent. And we're in these dreams, and the dream is like the play out of a story that was already in process, and they are adjusting the variables of our stories so that we work through the shit we need to work through so that we can finalize that story so that a new story can freshly start. And what I understood was that we're not even really in the 3D anymore, the way that we think of the 3D. There was a time that we were in the 3D, but really we're just in the astral right now. We're just in the fourth dimension. We still perceive that everything is manifested physically, but the ship is sort of like the transit process through the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension. As I say this, I'm like, I don't know if I'm making sense, but
let's break it down a little bit here, because
okay.
so like I look at my hand, you're saying I'm not in the 3D, but I look at my hand and I say, okay, well, there's length, there's width, there's height to my hand. So whenever you're saying I'm not in the 3D anymore, what does that mean?
I guess I mean that, well, do you remember, like, when you think back to the 80s or the 90s, can you remember it?
Well, I wasn't born until 94. So
Okay.
I remember parts
Okay.
of the 90s. Yes.
Okay. So then I don't even know, maybe it would still count in the 2000s. But like, let's go to the late 90s, like 98, 99. Do you remember the way that reality felt? Meaning, like, to me, it felt a little bit grittier, heavier, slower moving. It had a different texture to it. So
I,
it's very hard to describe. And if you were a little kid, you might not have been thinking about that
I feel
stuff,
like
you
I
know?
can, if I, as you're saying this, I'm kind of tapping back into either music videos that I were watching or TV shows. And
Mhm.
I guess I can feel it a little bit, but I don't know that I would be able to consciously be like, oh yeah, I know what you're saying, but maybe people listening would.
Yeah. I mean, you can try it in the 2000s too. I don't really remember as much in the 2000s. Something changed. So I'm not really sure. Like, maybe it was Y2K. We all think it was 2012, but maybe it was Y2K. I don't know. But if you watch shows from the 90s, definitely their life felt very different. And of course it did, because there was less technology, blah, blah, blah. But there was a different, things were more static, I guess. In this time that we're in, everything moves very fast. Like time, I don't know if you've noticed this, but time is just flying by. It's almost dizzying. Last year I had a really it was very challenging for me to orient myself to the way that time was feeling different. It's like moving so fast. We're moving through themes so fast. Our emotions are changing so fast. Our ideas are changing so fast. Like, everything moves so quickly. Whereas I take the 90s because I was a teenager in the 90s, so I remember it quite well. But in the 90s, it felt slower. Themes played out over a longer period of time. There was just more density is the best way I can describe it. So it felt more like, that quantum experiment that demonstrated the dual nature of particles, that like something can either be, a photon can be a particle or a
Yeah, the
wave.
double slit experiment.
The double
Yeah.
slit experiment. Yeah. So it's kind of like that, almost like back at a certain point in time, everything was a particle. Like, reality was a particle, and now it's a wave.
When you were
And
talking there, it was kind of
yeah, go ahead.
reminding me of recently, where I how do I articulate this? Like I'll work on like I'll have like these little side missions, if you will. Like one of the current ones I'm dealing with is patience, which is actually taking a lot longer than I was hoping, but but it's these little like side missions of, okay, now you need to start stepping into your power and exerting when you know something's right, but do it in a gentle and kind way. And there's those little things keep coming up into my reality a lot quicker, of like, okay, you need to exert yourself a bit more. Okay, you need to do a little bit more of this. Okay, you need to be a bit more patient, and so I've seen these, or you need to be a little bit more trusting. And so I have seen those appearing in my reality a lot faster. Is that kind of on board with what you're saying here?
Yeah. Yeah. Like we process information and we move through it so much faster. And the quality of time feels much faster as we do so. I have to bring everything back to a dream. So it's kind of like before, when I referred to us having been in the 3D in the past, it's like that deep place in the dream where you have no idea that it's a dream. Like you fully are 100% like, this is happening. This is me. And then as the consciousness rises up through the different brainwave frequencies closer to like waking consciousness, the dream becomes more malleable, more lucid.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like we can shift it more. I just think that's what's happening with
It's
us
like
on a
it's like when you're
consciousness
hyper
level.
aware of it. Like I know for a long time I had a dream journal. I've slowly moved away from it, and that's a whole rabbit hole of a conversation. But the premise of it is that for, how long would it have been? Maybe like the first 6-ish months of keeping it, like I barely dreamed at all. And then something pivoted and I was like dreaming every single night. And then there was like another pivot where then I was lucid dreaming pretty frequently. And it sounds like what you're saying is, you're becoming aware of these subtler energies, or like being fully aware of the reality that you're experiencing.
Yeah, exactly. That's totally it. And thank you for sharing that, because that's very cool just to hear that it was about 6 months where you probably felt a lot of the time like, why am I even keeping
Oh
this
yeah.
dream journal?
I
I
took
can't
time off
remember
too.
any dreams.
I was like, fuck this isn't working.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And then, but nonetheless, because you had created an intention like that your dreams were worth exploring, eventually that changed things and you started dreaming every night, and then it changed again and you started lucid dreaming. But yeah, I think that we are just learning how to lucid dream. We're learning at this time to remember that this is also a dream state. Like we think that we're awake, but it's just a different state of consciousness to when we're asleep. We're still in the dream and we are learning how to lucid dream. And I believe that the fifth dimension is when we like nail it. Like we know how this works. And so we can create the dream, sculpt it in real time, individually and together, and very intentionally create something so much more beautiful than what we're experiencing right now. Because right now it's a bunch of our unconscious shadow, our repressed shadow, and like the accumulation of lifetimes of grief and suffering and anger and vengeance and rage. Like all that stuff has to play out somehow. And so it's playing out through our current narratives. And that's why that the using the analogy of a purge for the C word, I think is very apt, because it's purging all of that repressed shit that's still there. I mean, that's what I see in the Akashic records, is like, just because somebody dies doesn't mean the emotional state that they experienced predominantly during their lifetime goes away. It remains. And that's what the Akashic records are, is like the record, the remnant, the imprint of everything that has been experienced. And we've been functioning as humans through sort of a paradigm of like, keep calm, carry on, and just like interrupt our emotional process, get over it, keep moving forward. But it really is like, we have a huge, like, just because you don't poo, if you don't have the chance to poo when you naturally have to poo, the poo doesn't go away. It's still in your body. Like you have to wait until the opportunity comes up again, right? And it's like that with all of our emotional states, or our felt states of being, or the identity that we perceive ourselves to be, and it just sort of collects, and we have to purge it, we have to release it, otherwise we just keep recreating different versions of the same themes.
I kind of want to bring this back again to like the 3D, the 4D, and the 5D, because I think this feels like a very important thing we should nail down if we're like for the remainder of this conversation. So like it feels like then, and maybe I'm just repeating your words back to you, but just so I'm on the same page. When we're saying 3D, you're not essentially saying that it's my hand that I'm looking at. Like you can be let's say you can be in the fifth dimension consciously. Like it's more of a conscious act as opposed to like a physical of where am I type thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like I can be in the fifth dimension and see my hand and know that that's a third dimensional object, but consciously I am making decisions from a higher perspective. Is that kind of maybe dimension is the wrong word because it makes me think of length, width, and height, but we're talking about something slightly different.
Yeah, I guess I refer to them as dimensions of consciousness, but the way that I understand the dimensions is that they are bandwidths of consciousness. So in the third dimension, consciousness, it's a lot like the visible light spectrum and the whole entire electromagnetic spectrum. But so in the red light spectrum, the wavelengths take on a certain quality. They're longer, more stretched out, and that's how they have to behave. In that, it's not a rule, but you could call it a law because it never deviates from that. And so the third dimension, the way I see it is like the energy of consciousness, or we could just call it energy, slows down and takes on these geometric shapes that are fairly stable. And that creates, and then we decode those shapes. We render it into all of the texture and the color, like we as the observer are really an absolutely necessary component to experiencing the 3D the way that we do. At its fundamental core, like when you look at molecular structures, right, they're just shapes. It's just shapes, atoms coming together in geometric formations that are fairly stable. But they're still very dynamic. They change over time. And then we interpret them and create this whole amazing world out of it. In the fifth dimension of consciousness, you would look down at your hand and you would have a hand, but because your consciousness is now expanded and anchored into the fifth dimension, you wouldn't experience your hand as physical anymore. You would experience it as like almost plasma light. So everything would be more malleable, much faster to change because it doesn't have that same sense of solidity and fact. And it's so much a product of our beliefs. Am I making sense?
Yeah. It's I guess it's really the perception that we're talking about when we're talking about third dimension, fourth dimension, fifth dimension. It's not so much about this physical dimension, because if we're talking about this physical dimension, that's purely third, and I guess it kind of leaks into the fourth if we're talking about time.
Yeah.
But our perception of it, and this is probably where a lot of triggering happens, which is our identification with this third dimension. And I guess this is where that overlap comes in, because if you have third dimension consciousness, that means you're attached to the third dimension, the physical plane of reality. Mm-hmm. If you start getting to the fourth dimension, it's like, okay, I can almost separate myself from this individual moment and look at that fourth dimension of time and say, oh, okay, like I can see that over time, like good things happen, bad things happen, good things happen, bad, but it's going to take you on this like journey. And so you don't really know what that journey is, but you know that it exists. And then fifth dimension would be that the perspective above that, where you're then able to actually move that trajectory how you would like.
Yeah, totally. And the third dimension still exists as a real bandwidth, right? So I perceive that when we're in the fifth dimension, first of all, like the big hurdle is the fourth dimension. That's It's funny that we say we're shifting from 3D to 5D and nobody talks about the 4D when actually that's the big challenge is the 4D, because that's where all of our stories exist and we're super wrapped up in
What
our
makes it so
stories.
challenging before we go through that?
It's the stories. It's because like, so for example, let's say you have or like not you, but one has a story that every time they try something new, they fail, that they're just incapable. They can't, like, they never succeed, or they have bad luck with everything. It just never works out for them. That's a powerful story. There is a lot of energy that's holding that story in place and continues to manifest, supportive scenarios that reinforce that story. And so it's very challenging for us to start to deconstruct that story and no longer buy into it and free ourselves from it so that we can then manifest something different. And that all exists in the fourth dimension. Like the third dimension on its own, it's just facts. It just is. Like animals they mostly exist in third dimensional consciousness. They're just very much in the present moment. They're in their bodies. They're dealing with their third dimensional needs and their third dimensional experience. That part isn't so much the challenge. The fourth dimension is the challenge, where we have the self-awareness, but we're not masters of that self-awareness yet.
And this comes back then to that, I don't think we discussed it yet, but I've heard a lot where it's like, oh, Earth is like this school for us to explore and learn things. And it seems like, based on your answer, that this is that challenge of learning how we're able to deprogram out our instinctual behavior, right? Because if we have that program or that story that you were talking about where you have these money beliefs about being poor or bad things always happen to you, this is the place that's going to teach you how to rewrite that story. And I guess like the fourth dimension is the story, right? Like, because how we were talking about how it's like this, it's the time. And any story that you have, any good story, is going to take time to unfold. You don't just jump into the movie theater, watch one frame, and then jump out. You're like, oh, okay, like that was a great movie. Like you watched one frame, and a movie is thousands or maybe millions of frames that are all put together over a 3-hour period. And so, and I'm trying to just repeat your words back to you, using that as like third dimension is being aware of those individual frames, but then fourth dimension is seeing the perspective of how those individual movie frames create the entire movie.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Totally. And I think a lot of us, we're just in the place where we're forgetting that it's a movie because it feels so real. And we're so like, then we buy into it and we inadvertently, unknowingly perpetuate, especially the challenging portions of the movie because it feels so real.
Yeah. Have you found like a way, or have the records ever talked to you about, let me think about this. Because based on what you're saying, we find ourselves in these heavy situations, very dense, very, terrible things that occur in the world or have occurred in the world and maybe will occur in the future. How do we almost separate ourselves from that or release that heaviness, right? Because how do we release that heaviness? I don't want to kind of trail on here, but how do we release that heaviness, if you will?
The heaviness of the fear of bad things happening in the future.
The heaviness of bad things happening now, right? Because as we're sitting here having this conversation, there's horrific things that are happening all across the world, but how do we take a step back and work with that? Like, how are we supposed to move forward given that predicament?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like this is so poignant right now. I just recorded a podcast intro for my own podcast where I was like literally talking about this because well, there are a few different angles. So first of all, I perceive that there is a glamour that's cast upon all those things. Do you know what I mean when I say glamour?
No, please break that down.
Okay, so it's a magic term that refers to basically like you cast a projection screen of allure and magnetism over top of anything, and it doesn't necessarily make it attractive. Like if we look at the fires and the situation happening in Hawaii, it's not attractive. None of us are looking at that and feeling like, oh gosh, isn't the world just beautiful? We know it's horrible, but it has a glamour cast on it that's designed to basically harness our attention, because our attention is by far the most powerful currency. Money is so valueless compared to our attention. Our attention is what manifests. It's the deciding factor of what collapses the waveform into, a decided timeline, right? So I perceive that like over celebrity culture, sports culture, music and entertainment culture, mainstream news, politics, truther news, all of it, their social media for sure. There is a glamour that is designed to take you out of this present, actually manifested moment in your life and like cause you to feel all manner of things. But for me, and I think like the people that resonate with me, it's mostly like an empathic level of distress where you're so aware of the suffering people must be experiencing and you feel so helpless to do anything about it. And we're just sending out these like distress waves. And those are a version of loosh energy. Have you heard of loosh?
I have not.
Okay. I can't remember who coined that term, but it's a term to describe like our powerful emotional emanations, and they're usually negative emotions. And there are like, if you know anything about how magic spells and rituals work, it is an extremely energy rich commodity, and it is used to charge up basically like symbols, sigils, spells. Like there is a lot of sorcery. A lot of the dark actors are involved in sorcery, and just different versions of magic to try and manipulate the variables of this reality towards the outcomes that would serve them. And they really do not care about the collateral damage to anyone else. And so there's this glamour that's cast over it to take you out of this moment in your life right now, which is the only moment that you have. This is where your power is. This is where all of our power is in this moment. And it also robs us of the joy of what we're living right now as we look at these things that cause us intense distress that we can't do anything about. And so the guidance that I receive is to just be extremely selective of what I allow myself to see and spend time on. And I'm aware that that can sound super privileged and like cold-hearted and like I don't care about the suffering, but I just understand that my ability to hold a frequency of a utopian timeline rather than a dystopian timeline is the most powerful contribution I can make from where I am. If somebody feels within themselves a calling, let's say, to go to Hawaii and assist and like bring themselves to the doorstep of that, that reality that people are experiencing, then they should absolutely listen to that. But for all of us who know, like, I know I'm not called to do that. I know that I need to stay here and take care of my family. And so it's not on my doorstep. And so I can't lose a bunch of my energy to it, but I can also hold it with deep compassion. And instead of sending out like distress signals, I can send out like deep love signals.
Okay, I get.
Hopefully that
I get what you're saying. It's bringing me to what's going on now in politics, and something I never really talk about. So hopefully I can try to keep a higher level perspective without jumping into the weeds of it. But what I've been seeing recently is in regards to President Trump with all these indictments that are occurring. And there are so many little things that just hint at nefarious BS, if you will, that's occurring with it. I'm not sure how familiar with it you are. I know you're in Canada, but like there's all this just like tomfoolery, if you will, with the people that are prosecuting him, they're leaking documents that couldn't have possibly been written at the time that they were coming out. And then the things are getting validated a couple of days later. And it's like, wait a second, like this is very nefarious. And now the prosecutor is trying to get his court date set for the day before like one of the bigger elections in like our next cycle. And I look at this and I use this situation to look at like kind of the trajectory of my life, because back in the day, growing up, I was brought up very conservative, red Republican through and through. And then, when I went to college, I kind of shifted a little bit, kind of went to conspiracies, kind of like, I don't know what's for me. And where I'm finding myself now is like looking at this, and I had an anger phase where it was like, all these people are doing illegal shit. How are they not in jail? How is this stuff not, how are they not being prosecuted? But it's at a point now where, and I think this is what you're saying, to tie this back to like 3D, 4D, 5D, the 3D is being ingrained in having that side. Like, I'm a Republican, like that's me through and through. 4D is kind of seeing like, oh my gosh, they're going to do this, then this, then this. Now 5D might be kind of where I'm shifting into now in regards to politics, in regards to like, oh my gosh, like this is so cool. Like I'm seeing energy of excitement when I'm seeing them trying to prosecute the day before, because it's like, this is just going to wake more people up. I kind of just see it as like all of these things like woken up. And I think statistically speaking, at least the stats that I've seen, is the more times that he gets indicted, the more that people want to vote for him, which I think is a terrible thing, generally speaking, is a terrible thing for our political establishment. For so many reasons, that's terrible. But I think the highlight in it is that it's waking people up to at least the BS that we're getting fed through media or through, these large corporations. And so I don't know. I felt called to share that in regards to this conundrum that we're talking about with like, okay, what can I actually do about it? Well, you can fully divorce yourself from it and then look at it from this higher perspective of seeing how this movie is going to play out.
Yeah, totally. And like, I think that's a perfect example of what I was trying to relay about that message I got, that we're on the ships and we're in this. So we are dreaming right now. This is our dream. And the beings that are tending to us are adjusting the variables of the story and basically cranking the dial up so it gets more and more insane, because the objective is to wake us up so that we are no longer identified with the weird things that we have identified ourselves with, so that we can break free of that and we can start to look at it from that more objective perspective and wake up to the truth that at a certain level, we're not actually threatened by it, which I know is a really big thing to say, because at a certain level we are. Like in our human incarnations, we experience suffering, and that's real and it counts. But if you can tap into, for example, like your Akashic records and tap into your past lives, you realize like, oh, even the worst things I've suffered through have not, it doesn't end me. And there's only ever more of me. And so actually it's all okay. Yeah. I always like, these things are so integrated for me, but then when I share them out loud and they're coming out in words, I'm like, I might sound like such a nut bar right now and like just an extremist of like spiritual bypassing. But to me, it doesn't feel like spiritual bypassing. The way that I really came to understand a lot of this was when my second born son died when he was 20 days old.
Oh, wow.
And that was literally my worst fear in this life. Like I remember having it even as a teenager. Like I was either afraid I would never be able to have children or that I would lose a child. And I lived through it. And it was one of the greatest gifts that I could have been given, because I saw that I'm still here. It's okay. It's like I've been through some of the deepest grief this summer around it. It's the 7-year anniversary this year, and it completely sideswiped me. I had no idea that the depth of grief that awaited me was coming at 7 years. So I'm not trying to suggest that there's no pain involved, but but it showed me like life continues. There's so much joy in my life. There's so much beauty. My relationship with him is beauty. Like I would do it over and over again just to be his mom. It, like the thing that we think is going to destroy us actually only destroys us if we believe we are destroyed. It only diminishes us if we believe we are diminished. But actually it cracked me open to understand a whole other layer of depth to myself. So I know that I'm not really afraid of being alive anymore because I know that other things like that are going to happen. That's the way life goes. And I know that I'll be able to handle the next one that does. And it will also like bring me to my knees and break me open. But the only thing I'll find is more of myself.
I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure that was a wild journey in itself. And something you kind of brought up in there is the idea of spiritual bypassing, which I'm familiar with as in regards to taking on this perspective of, oh, well, I'm a spiritual being, so I don't need to do anything. So, and in your words, I'm not saying that you're doing that, but like if someone's just to take on that ideology, right, of like, oh, okay, well, my son died. It's all right because we're spiritual beings. I'll see him in another life. How do you make that pivot from it being integrated, I know that this is okay, versus it being a energy of spiritual bypassing?
Yeah, I think that when we're spiritually bypassing, we can kind of feel that there's a more like human or like a deeper emotional experience that we are trying to detach ourselves from prematurely. So it's kind of like saying, like people sometimes say affirmations and they repeat them robotically, and it's almost like if you look in yourself in the mirror every day and you can say the nicest things to yourself, but if there's a trauma that is keeping a belief that is counter to that affirmation like alive, then you can kind of feel it. You feel the dissonance and you get to a point where you're like, this isn't working, and you have a breakdown, and then the emotions can come up. Like I also don't worry about people spiritual bypassing too much because I'm like, everybody's going to get there anyway. Like we don't get to avoid those emotions forever. We get there when our time comes, and I just, for whatever reason, well, I know why. It's because I wanted to spiritually bypass. It was so confusing for my body. He was born prematurely as well. It was so confusing for my body. And I just wanted to get pregnant again right away. Like I did not want to feel what I had to feel. And my husband, on the other hand, was like, I can't even think about that. I can't even fathom the possibility of that ever happening to me ever again. So he didn't want to, and I couldn't override his decision. And so I really had no choice but to go through that process of being really present with it. But I can think of a lot of instances in my life where I like tried to kick the can down the road and spiritually bypass and cover it up with a bunch of, platitudes. But eventually it all came for me. So, it's a human thing, I think, that we do, and it's not a big deal in the end.
Yeah, is that, I guess it feels to me as though you're taking a step back from, trying to think of how to articulate this. Because something I guess that's something that's coming to me, and I don't know how this relates, but I'm going to just go with it and see where it takes us. In the last podcast that I did with Asha Nayaswami, she was talking about, I brought up to her this Buddhist philosophy, which is that there's relative truth and there's absolute truth. And something about it didn't really feel right to me. And I brought it up to her and she was like, well, there's some truth to it, pun intended, I guess. And she kind of described it as it more being directional, as truth being this directional thing that, you progress deeper to it. It's something that, you can progress deeper to it. You can also move away from it if you so choose. And how it's more of like a linear conundrum of getting closer to absolute truth or getting further away from it. And now I'm not sure why I brought that up, because I thought it was going to come to me as I was explaining that.
Well, I mean, I see the relevance.
Fill me in. Fill me in.
It's
Maybe I was supposed to throw it back to you.
yeah. So when you were saying that, I see it and I agree. Like, bring it back to spiritual bypassing. It's like, if you are covering it up with unintegrated spiritual platitudes, there's something painful inside of you that you don't want to look at. You can be saying the platitudes and saying the words, but you feel yourself moving farther away from absolute truth. And you can then redirect yourself when you're ready to move towards absolute truth. And that often means moving through extremely painful states of being, but they're all temporary. And every time we actually do have the courage to move through them, it's almost like a high on the other side, because you've shed so much illusion and you are now resonating closer to that absolute truth. And I think that there is an absolute truth, and I think that absolute truth is love. And I think that that is, like, it can sound so ridiculous and kumbaya, but at the moment of our death, like the majority of us, when we're on our deathbed at the end of our incarnation, like, we already know that none of us are thinking about our bank accounts, and none of us are even thinking about, like, our sort of egoic achievements and accomplishments. We're thinking about those moments, like either the regret of wishing we had said the important thing to the important person, or the time lost that we wish we had spent with those we love, or doing something we love, or on a place, like something that connects us with love, or the appreciation for those moments that connect us with love. It's just the only thing that actually matters, because I think it's an absolute truth, because I think it is like the actual truth of everything.
Yeah, this is reminding me. I remember reading an article that I'm trying to pull up right now, which talked about, like, what people say whenever they're in hospice care, of like, what are the most important things in life. Because that was, I mean, that's huge, especially for me. I've had this kind of block around money that has almost vanished at this point, which I'm so happy about. But I can't find the article. 10 things people, how about damn, see, this is why I need, is anyone a producer that lives in Pittsburgh? You guys want to come help me pull up stuff?
Like, you totally do need a production manager.
Most people say.
Well,
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead if you have it.
no, I just wanted to ask, like, what, if you mind sharing, like, what is that money block as you look for the article?
Oh, the money block.
Or what was it?
Not trusting. Well, I mean, mine was big around trust, not trusting that it was going to come in, not making decisions, based in heart-centered and like helping people. Like, the more that I did things out of purely not doing it to get money, but doing it because I believe in the vision of something or someone, it just came in. Like, what was the big one? So one example would be like with jujitsu. I've recently started teaching and helping the youth program there, which has been super rewarding on so many levels and has taught me a lot about myself and just kids. And like, I genuinely enjoy it. And, it doesn't pay a lot of money at all. I think it's probably about $15 to $20 per hour, but I'm doing something I love, and I am giving back. I'm giving back to a community that has helped me so much. And what has been happening is, like, the more that I've just approached it with, like, I'm just doing this because I love it. Like, money is just a little add on the top. The people in charge just tend to keep giving me more money. They're like, hey, like, we know you're doing 4 classes a week and it comes out to like this much per month, but we're just gonna bump it up like another like $50. Oh, hey, we noticed you worked that extra event. Like, we've only been given $50 to it, but we'll give you like another 50. And so that stuff has just been happening. There's another situation that I don't think I can talk about publicly, but I've just noticed that theme has kind of been occurring, where it's like, just kind of keep pursuing the things that you want to do, and it'll kind of just unlock. And then there's another level to it of making these big things, like these big stretches of having, X, like, let's say, like right now. So right now, as I'm recording this, I'm in my parents' basement, but I've been really getting called lately that I need to move out. And, that comes in with all this money things. It's like, well, I'm not seeing the money come in. I'm not seeing this. I'm not seeing that. And, it's been this ping of, do you really need to see the money in order to know that you're going to be supported? Like, how do you know that this isn't the actions you need to take in order to unlock that next level? It's like, oh shit, like that's a good point. And so I've kind of been making those moves in order, like I haven't officially signed a lease, but September 1st, I'll be like moving into a new place. And I've been seeing like things with my coaching program, like learning new things in regard to coaching in order to get more clients in the door. I've been implementing, and I can already see, I can kind of see that story we're talking about. I can see like down the road of how this is going to play out. And, it's very, it's beautiful, and it feels resonant. And I can see how it is. I'm trying to bring this back to a way that would help people who are listening to this story. I can see how it's supportive, and I can see how, it comes back to relativity. Oh, $10,000 is a lot of money. You're making $10,000 a month. That's a lot. And even someone came up to me. I was like, oh yeah, I'm moving into like the strip district on September 1st. And they're like, oh, you must make a lot of money. And given my current financial situation, I'm just like, it kind of like made me laugh because, there's so much wrapped up in that of like relativity. It's like, I didn't say I was moving into the Hamptons. I didn't say I was buying $1 million mansion. Like, that's a lot of money to me. And so, relativity is mixed into there. B, it's not even present realized earnings. And yet there's this outward perception that I'm making a lot of money. And so it really has shown a lot to me in regards to like our perception around things and the way that it influences our decisions. Because like what I was getting called to do was to make a ridiculous, ask in terms of like the housing situation I was going to move into, which was a lot of money, relatively speaking. And so by doing that, it has, in the last month, has shifted me into attracting and doing and acting in ways that would support that lifestyle. And I think this is a big part, is that had it not been unfolding the way that it would have been too much stress for my nervous system to handle. And I think that's where this can come down kind of into the 3D, if you will, is that there have been so many events that have occurred since me starting to search for this place, since saying yes, since the person saying yes. This comes into the whole patience thing, where had my nervous system not been ready for this, I could have shot myself in the foot 10 times already in regards to getting to signing this lease. And I mean, honestly, I can already still see there's a possible tripwire that's laying in front of me in regards to patience, that if I walk across this tripwire, that maybe it'll set off this chain reaction where all of this will fall apart. And then adding another layer on top of this, it's being completely okay with that all falling apart. And a lot of this comes back to vulnerability, because I have been telling people like, I'm moving into the strip district September 1st, but there's still a piece of me that's like, but you haven't officially signed the lease yet. And so, there's this people pleasing and how are people going to view me if it all falls apart. And so there's just this level of like, there's just so many lessons bound up into this one thing that it's bringing a smile on my face, and I'm getting a little teary eyed just thinking about it. So it's been super cool in all those regards.
Yeah. That's such an amazing breakdown of all of the layers and the nuances, right? That like you could have just explained it as like, a story of the fear, like, is the money going to be there? Especially if I follow my heart and my soul calling, is it actually going to be there? Can I do it? Which is all true. But then you went into all these other layers underneath it. And that's kind of the complexity that we're all dealing with, which makes the fourth dimension super hard because there's so many, it's all intertangled and entwined. But it's like when you were talking about this tripwire and what if I walk into it, and then it all falls apart. And I was thinking, like, it's only because it's your dream. And, you know, so there's like the tripwire just represents something that you haven't fully smoothed out in your energy. And so then it acts as a tripwire, and then your dream goes and it manifests, like, you know, an outcome of it falling apart. And then you said, and then being okay with it just falling apart. And I was like, that's exactly it. That's the thing that smooths out the energy around the tripwires. Like, if I trip, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay because it's not the last place.
Right. And it's so funny too, because through this whole process, you know, again, coming back to like this apartment, saying yes to this, it's kind of a townhouse, saying yes to this townhouse has a what's the words I'm looking for here? Saying yes to this townhouse was like a large increase in income that I was going to need to start putting myself into. And so there was like a piece of me, like, you know, I'm getting the ping from source. It's like, yeah, you got to do this, go through the process. Where I'm like, okay, yes, I'm in, like, I trust you. But there was nervousness of it actually happening. Recently, now I'm starting to get nervousness of it not actually happening. And I'm just sitting here like, all right, I get it. Like, all right, I get it. I'll take a step back. I'll remember my, you know, breathing techniques. I'll calm myself down, and, you know, I'm going to do the best that I can. But at the end of the day, if this isn't for my highest self, I trust that you're going, kind of like what we talked about on your podcast, where I have that little thing where I'll just be like, yeah, if this isn't for my highest self, I trust that you'll prevent me from doing it. I'll prevent me from having it until I am ready for it to be for my highest self.
Yeah, totally. Which is such a huge level of trust to embody. And so it's so amazing. Do you do any kind of visualization, or like, I don't like restricting it to visualizing because I know some people aren't visual, but like, do you do any like preparatory, like feeling it before it happens kind of work?
Yes. So I don't know how much we got into this whenever I was on your podcast. Also, by the way, guys, I was on Amy's podcast, so go check out Cuteri on Third Eye Awakening. I forget, what number was it? Do you remember what number it was?
I have no idea what number any of my podcasts are, but it was like 3 weeks ago, so
I think we
fairly
talked about,
recent.
like, I think the God consciousness was in the title or something.
Yeah.
But to get back to it, where was I going with this? Oh, what do I do? A big element, I think, of what I do is in regards to teachings by Paramahansa Yogananda. Like, I literally just ordered another book of his because he's just something about the way he speaks and everything just resonates to my core. What is it that I do? You know, I see that this whole thing that we're engaged is this mutual connection between me and God, right? There's a divine spark. We talked about this part. There's a divine spark in all of us. So my goal as a human is to become as much in tune with that divine spark as possible. So what that means is I'm basically co-creating this entire reality with God. So as I'm coming to decisions, you know, I've noticed that there's leeway in the decisions we can make. So what started this chain reaction within regards to my housing situation was me knowing that I need to get out of my parents' basement, but where am I going to go? And this where's God was like, hey, like, you know that you need to make the next steps, but you're being indecisive. Because for a long time I was like, oh, I either want to go to Austin, Texas, or I'm just going to stay in Pittsburgh. But like, God, whichever one's for me, like, you decide, like, I'll, you know, whatever. And nothing was shifting. And it wasn't until I actually fully decided, like, you know, making a pros and cons list of why Austin, why Pittsburgh, I could see that there was more material reasons in Austin, but there was more deeper spiritual reasons to stay in Pittsburgh. And so, you know, ultimately I picked Pittsburgh. And then once I was like, okay, I'm all in on Pittsburgh, and started listing out what I wanted in a place and all this different stuff, that was whenever kind of the magic started unfolding. So to kind of keep this going, what happened? So whenever I saw this place for the first time, there were so many just like sparks that were getting fired off. First of all, it was far bigger and far more than I need, which was, of course, one of the beautiful blessings that God, I think, gives, or I guess I almost know at this point, one of the blessings that happens. But another thing is as I was kind of walking through it, I could kind of see where everything would go. Okay, podcast studio is going to be here. the jujitsu is going to happen here. Okay, that's where my meditation room is going to be. And so it was almost this, if you want to say, going back to our movie analogy, seeing scenes from that movie before they were transpiring, and oh my gosh, like I think this makes sense. This is the place. And so we leave the apartment, and the realtor, whatever, leaves before me, and I'm like, oh wait, hey, I just saw that the light's on. And she's like, okay, well, I can get it later, but if you're there, like, do you want to handle it? And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I got it. And so she gave me the code to the place. I, turn off the light, and then I stand there for a second and try to just connect with the energy of the place. At which point, I kind of meditated / prayed. It's kind of hard to describe. I know there's a difference, but that's a whole another conversation. And I was basically like, hey, God, like if this is the spot, I'm in. Like kind of give me a sign. And one of my big signs that I usually get is like an electric shock that kind of runs through my body. It'll start at my feet and then very quickly like go up my legs, through my spine, into my head. And something about it always is just like, it's like a yes feeling, or like it's this feeling of like divinity within me, if you will. And so whenever that happened, I was like, okay, like say no more. I'm down. I'm completely in. And it scared the shit out of me. Amy, I was fucking scared. I was like, I have no idea how this is going to unfold, but I'm down for the ride. And so that would have probably been right at the beginning of August. So like the last 20 some days have been crazy in regards to money flowing in from different places, seeing new ways to approach content, just personal energetic frequency, I don't know, vibrations in regards to trust or patience or all those different fun stories we were talking about. So to get back to your question, I think the absolute best thing that you can do is get yourself to a place of calmness. And I don't know if we touched on this in your podcast, but one thing that Paramahansa does talk about is how calmness is a manifestation of God. So when we're feeling calm, we're feeling peace, we're feeling bliss, that's whenever we can communicate with God. If our nervous system's activated, if we're in that sympathetic response, if we're agitated, you're not going to be receiving the divine message of God because you're too attached to something. There's too much energy going on, because the voice of God is a lot more calm. It's a lot smoother. It's a lot more, I think there's a verse. Let me see. There's a verse in the Bible that's along the lines of be still and know that I am God. Psalms 46:10. Yeah. Be still and know that I am God. It's literally saying that like stillness is where God lies. Being relaxed, being calm, that is God speaking to you. So if you're able to carry out that feeling, that is your connection to the divine source. I know everyone, especially in our communities, are like, you got angelic beings, you got these, you got spirit guides, you got the light star seeds, which are fine and dandy, and they do exist. My whole thing has recently just been like, well, why don't I just go to the source of it all? Why?
Yeah.
Like, I think they're good. I think they're fun. I think they're fun to like play with and talk to and all that stuff. But why not just go to the source? And so to kind of just get back to your question, yeah, I get myself as calm as possible. I get really in tune with my nervous system, which has helped a lot with like cold plunges, because that'll activate your nervous system immediately. And so you can now feel it. You're like, oh, this is what it feels like whenever I'm in a fight or flight mode. And so then you learn how to de-stress yourself, become calm, contact God, and then have a peaceful, calm conversation.
Yeah, that's amazing. I knew that cold plunges were good for that, but I've never heard anybody break it down like that, where I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. You would cold plunge, you would let your nervous system be totally activated into like survival, fight or flight contraction. And then you employ like breathwork techniques or whatever to at will, like, move it into a state of calm. I agree so much. And that's really like a big piece of how I teach people psychic activation is that if our nervous system is activated and contracted, we're not going to be able to pick up. We're not going to be able to connect with God. We're not going to be able to connect with our higher selves, our intuition, like whatever layer of beings like you were talking about, or layer of information we want to connect with, we really, really, really have to learn how to regulate the nervous system.
And I think I heard you talking about this in a podcast, but even, that element of trusting, like if you're not trusting yourself, that's going to activate your nervous system. You're going to be like, wait,
Yeah.
oh shit, like they just told me that I was this and that this happened, and that can't be true. That can't be right. Like that little bit of ensure, that little bit of ensure. I love when I just make up phrases on this podcast. I'm starting to vibe with it now, because I at first was like, okay, I need to be proper etiquette speaking, but I think there's something with like, oh, we talked about this on your podcast for sure, with like making up words that like actually make
Yeah.
sense, like speaking out of grammatical punctuality because it makes more sense without it.
Yes.
Where was I going with that though? I forgot my train of thought now. I was excited about that.
You were talking about that doubt, that little bit of doubt that comes in terms of like receiving psychic information.
Yeah, because that doubt will snap you out of it, right? You'll start questioning yourself. It activates the nervous system, and that's what will shut off essentially your guests will shut off. That was the completely wrong word. Will shut off your psychic abilities because you're not in the place of calmness. So, that's how you kind of detach yourself. And then, if you want to bring this back to the real world or actual world, it's like, that's all of this stuff we're talking about, worrying about the fires, worrying about the fluoride that's in our water, worrying about who's going to be the next president, worrying about, things that are completely out of my control. The number one thing that you have in your control is your nervous system. That's 100% it. And it seems to me the more that I just relax that, and I know what my triggers are too, which is cool. Like if my mom's about to say something, or like I can feel the energy before it even happens.
Yes.
Yeah. And so just taking that second to just, okay, let me approach this from a calm place. It changes everything. It changes everything.
It does. I totally know what you mean, because I'm the same with my husband. Like, I love him so much. He'll, it just happens when you're in a long-term relationship, you get on each other's nerves. And so he is the one that keeps me informed, whether I ask about it or not, about the doomsday scenarios of the world. Like, he's my chief advisor that I never hired. So I'll feel him coming into the room with that energy. Like I'll just feel it before it happens. And exactly that exact thing of just like, okay, and I don't need him to be different. I can just allow this to play out and neutralize it. It really does change things, because then that's the main thing, at least for me, is like, then I don't need him to be different or anybody else that triggers me, or some kind of scenario. Like, I don't need that thing to change in order to feel better. I can just feel better, which is extremely liberating in all areas of life.
I think that's what salvation is. Whenever we're talking about becoming one with God, it's completely freeing yourself from that. It manifests in the nervous system, but it's freeing yourself from that energy as a whole.
Yeah. I love that. I love the topics of like redemption and salvation, things like that. I don't talk about them very much because I feel like they're super lofty, but I just love those topics and understanding what salvation really means. Because I think at the end of the day, at the end of whatever the proverbial day, all of us as souls, we meet that theme. It might not happen in a particular lifetime. We might be focused on other things, but there's a point where you're tired. It's almost like as a soul, you're tired. You're tired of all the whole trauma drama narrative that we do as humans, and you just seek to be reunited with the divine. And that is the process of salvation. And I think that that description you just offered is so beautiful, where you are one with God rather than outsourcing your power to all these other things that are happening. And then you become like the eye of the hurricane, where the chaos can be cycling all around you, but you are in your own centeredness, connected directly to God.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to plug his book, Paramahansa. I just got it in the I just got it in the
I got to check it out.
yeah.
I'm so glad you're showing it because I was
Well,
going to
there's
ask you
another
after
one. Well,
anyway.
there's another one. Oh my gosh, it's so crazy. Like, Amy, listen, don't I kind of read books. Like, sometimes I'll read like the first like couple pages. I'll be like, okay, I understand what they're saying, where they're going with this. Yeah, it's a good book. Like, you should read it. There's some books I can't really finish. There's some books, but I rarely read more than one book by people. Paramahansa, you should see up. I don't have it right here. In the next studio, I'll have it behind me. But I think I have probably 12 or 13 of his books at this point that are
Wow.
absolutely insane. Some of them are actually keeping my camera up right now. There's so many powerful ones, but definitely start off with Autobiography of a Yogi. But based on like what we're talking about here, the one that I'm reading right now is Inner Peace: How to Be Calmly Active and Actively Calm. It's so phenomenal because he just breaks it down. Oh, here, let me read you actually. I'll read you the chapter titles. All right, chapter 1, Where Can I Find Peace? Chapter 2, Meditation, the Science of Being Actively Calm. Chapter 3, The Spiritual Art of Relaxation, Removing Stress from Body and Mind. Chapter 4, How to Be Calmly Active, Centered in Peace no matter what you are doing. Chapter 5, Peace in Your Daily Life, Essential Principles and Practices. Chapter 6, The Wisdom Perspective That Leads to Inner Peace. I mean, and like, it's hard to put into words, but it makes so much
Mhm.
sense. It's being able to, going back to our movie analogy, being able to detach ourselves from that individual frame that we're experiencing right now, and just knowing that there's a bigger picture that's unfolding. Like, this one frame is a part of a much bigger picture, and we have no idea how it's going to unravel. So whether or not I get my house or not, whether or not I have to tell people that I'm not actually moving to the strip district, whether or not I lose all of my podcast equipment, someone comes in and steals it all, it's knowing to learn how to be peaceful in those moments. And especially every time you start getting triggered, it's amazing. Like, I'd go to tub clubs on every Wednesday, and I come down, and our parents, I share a car with them. I came down this morning and I was like, hey, like, they're like, oh, like, well, how's your day? I was like, oh, I have a podcast with Amy. I'm going to tub club later. And they're like, oh, we have a problem. Like, we all need the cars tonight. And that was like a trigger for me. Like, I like instantly noticed I get triggered. I'm like, nope. I'm just like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. And then, we start talking more about it, and then there's room for it because, like, worst case scenario, I could always get an Uber or something. And so, I'm not going to have to get an Uber, and it all can just like, it all ends up just working itself out where there's like no issue whatsoever. And it's really amazing how, gosh, it's just beautiful. I guess I just want to highlight that the book's beautiful about learning how to reclaim the inner peace within your body, within your citadel, such that you don't make detached or unaligned actions with your higher self.
Yeah. Which is isn't that what we all actually want? Like, it's funny because, a lot of the time we think we want to manifest, for example, money, or like money feels like a big one to me, even though it's not the one I'm the most interested in currently, but it previously was because I was learning how to master it. And, but we think we want money, or we think we want a specific relationship, or, whatever circumstances. And, Abraham Hicks says this, which I take some issue with the things that Abraham Hicks says, but there's a lot of truth there too, I feel. And like, she points out that everything you want is because you think you'll feel better for having it. So just feel better now, and then you get to have it. But if you wait till you have it until you feel better, you can't have it because you feel like shit, and it
Yeah.
exists where you feel better. But to bring it to the topic of inner peace, and like, it makes me so happy when people can like successfully write a book and market it and like bring that message to more of us, because we think we want these things, but the only reason any of us want money is because we want to feel free. We want to feel supported. We want to feel safe in our bodies and our nervous system to be our full authentic selves, and to move through the world in accordance to that, like those pings that we receive. we want to feel peace. Like that's all any of us actually want, is to just feel peace. So it's really amazing that somebody has written a book, somebody with a large audience and a large influence has written a book that's just like, just here's how this, just here's peace.
Yeah.
Learn it, feel it, be in that state. And then you don't have to worry. Like, I think as you were talking about it, I was thinking like that is then what is achieved when, like, when you hear people talking manifestation about the importance of surrender. And most of us, because we have these tight nervous systems and we have these really intense stories going, we're like, surrender means I'm giving up. Like I'm waving the white flag. It's never going to happen. I'm just accepting my shitty lot in life. But surrender means that you're in such a state of peace and like union with God that you don't feel like you need to micromanage anything anymore. You can just like, you're just opening up and dilating. You're just dilating and letting it all flow in because your vibration is peace. And so you know that the things that come in will match peace. And that anything that comes in just to be like, whoop, like let's shake it up a little bit, you will be able to regain peace very quickly and easily because it's like the inner state that has been chosen, you know? And bringing it back to our nervous systems, like, again, I think the nervous system is key to almost everything because a nervous system that is fearful is contracted. And then it is dialed into fearful, contracted things that reinforce. It's like that's all we can see when we have a contracted nervous system. When we cultivate peace and dilation, then we can allow in all those like really beautiful things that just feel almost like, can this even really be true? But we also vibrate at that state of being. And so we have a little bit of surprise, but also like, of course it's like this at the same time, you know, like I'm surprised and like, of course this is how it's going to go.
I think that's joy. I think that's like kind of just like the essence of joy and of like, you know, bliss almost, right? It's that state of just experiencing everything as if it's like new and brand new. And I don't know. It's a very fascinating feeling because it really can take you over in a beautiful way. And I think that's obviously another thing that people can struggle with, which is surrendering because, you know, or letting go because they think that they have to be in control of it. But, you know, and this really shook me. And this is kind of a bizarre thing, but there was like a fly that was in our kitchen. And, you know, I opened up the window, but he wouldn't go out. And so all I did was very peacefully, very calmly moved him out the window and he flew away. And whenever I did that, just like this overwhelming, like I was almost brought to tears with how much joy and how much like, it was the most profound thing in the world. And I'm sure it even sounds weird saying it now that like helping a fly out the window could bring so much joy and just so much serenity, but it did. And that's something, I mean, that just really, really blew me away that much joy could be in helping an insect move on the other side of a piece of glass.
It totally makes sense to me because what I hear when you're saying that is like this deep recognition in that moment, in that scenario, that you were free of the perception that you have to destroy this other life form in order to return to your state of peace. Like your peace is not fragile. It's very deeply intentionally cultivated. And so as you watch this other little life form fly away onto its own trajectory, because you don't, do you know what I mean? Like you don't, again, I think about like my husband is just killing the flies everywhere with like, we've gone through several fly swatters and I think about it, I'm like, and I know, and I've talked to him about it, I'm like, your piece is very fragile. You have a fragile piece because there's something deeper that wants to be gone into. And I think that's true of a lot of people. Like I'm not meaning to throw him under the bus. He's just the person I live with. But, and I know I've been in that state before too, where it's a veneer of peace, but underneath is chaos. And if that veneer is, if there's turbulence, then it feels like, it can feel like suddenly the chaos is predominant and you have cultivated such a deep state of peace that the fly is not a threat. And then that extends to every other form of life. You don't need to destroy or crush anyone or anything else in order to be at peace. You can let it go.
Here's throw in this nice little duality here. I don't know if you guys have them in Canada yet, but the lanternflies, are you familiar with those?
No.
So it's prevalent right now in Pittsburgh and probably most of northeastern United States. They're these little flies that I think only live for about a year, but they grow to be probably, probably the size of a $50, and they are invasive. So I think they came over from, our other favorite C word, China, and they've been just their saliva will like get on trees and it'll like kill the trees, and they reproduce like crazy, and they're very destructive. And this was a huge piece of me that was a little bit difficult for a while for me to integrate, which was in regards to killing them, because I'm like, I was kind of in this middle of like, kind of Jainism and Sikhism and Buddhism and Hinduism, where it's like, okay, where does destruction come into this? Like, this is killing, like that's not okay. And, kind of the message I found is that, this is a species that's not in their, a couple things was unraveling here. Number one, is that it's a species that's not in their appropriate environment. And so it will cause more harm than good. And so, it's almost dutiful in order to kill them. The next thing that comes in is like, okay, are you killing them with malicious intent, or are you killing them in regards to serving a higher power in terms of, serving the greater good? And, this came into a big issue as well with me, because, and I briefly talked about this at the end of one of my podcasts. Actually, I don't know if it's out there or not, but I know that there's a strong opinion that humans are a plague on the earth and we should be wiped out. I mean, it's probably not strong, but it exists. And so, I'm kind of sitting there in this conundrum of like, like, I know we're not a plague. I know we're capable of beautiful things. So like, why are we not supposed to be wiped out, but I'm supposed to wipe out this bug? Because again, this was in regards to killing this bug, it came from a place of calmness where I'm like, am I supposed to do this? It's like, yes. And I'm like, shit, like, it created that tension in my body, that tension of this is something you're supposed to do in order to, I don't want to say conquer your fear. Maybe it is conquering a fear of doing harm, conquering that fear. But it's like, so sorry to go down that rabbit hole, but coming back to this idea of humans, how is it then that humans are not a plague on this earth, but these insects in particular is something that I should be trying to help eradicate? And the way that it was kind of came to me is like, well, Earth was made for humans. Humans are supposed to be here. This insect was not made for this geographical location. So it is not supposed to be here. It changes. I was shown that it changes perspectives if you go to China and then start killing them. It's like, now you're doing wrong. You're now malicious intent with your killing. However, with, in terms of killing this insect in Pittsburgh or the Northeast or anywhere that it might be invasive, it's teaching you a different lesson. It's teaching you that lesson of, are you able to carry out, killing something that's invasive, that shouldn't be where it's supposed to be? But can you do that with peace? Can you do that with calmness? Can you do that with bliss? And wow, I just got this perspective. If we zoom out and look at the C word we were talking about, think about how many people lost their lives, or their lives were changed, or they came into harm from our physical perception. But if we take a step back from the perception of God, it's to make space for this new energetic upgrade. And I mean, holy shit, like, think about how much that has to, or had to have pained her, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think I'm getting at a point where I may be just out of my perception of reality, but just that conundrum exists where there might be times where See, that doesn't feel right to say. I'm going to hold back from saying that. Maybe this is a good spot to open it up to you if you have anything to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is a perfect example of why it doesn't work to speak about things like this in terms of absolutes or like absolute rules, because there's so much subtlety and nuance. Because I think you're totally right. It depends on the true state from which, if you're killing these bugs, the state from which you're doing it versus like the description I offered of the fly. And maybe that's not true. Like that's just what I thought when you were, sharing the story of the fly. But if somebody was killing the fly because they perceived the fly as an annoyance and a threat and like, whatever, that is basically like essentially it's a vibration of feeling disempowered to the external circumstances. If you're killing something from a space of connecting with, like higher self or God consciousness, and that's the message that you receive, you can do it with beautiful love. Like again, like I know how cheesy this sounds in words, but I remember hearing a podcast interview a gajillion years ago. I don't remember what it was, but the woman who hosted it was speaking for a segment with a man who did the slaughtering for a halal food producer. And he said that his job was so sacred because he would pray over the animal, be with the animal, like divinely connect with the animal and thank it for its life and then take its life. And the words he used specifically to describe it really moved me such that I remember that conversation like 10 years later, because I thought death isn't the enemy. So the taking of something's life is not, or the ending of some being's life is not the thing that we should all avoid. And as we put our efforts into avoiding the inevitability of death, I think we create a lot of problems. So the end of one life form, I guess it kind of goes back to what I was saying maybe half an hour ago or maybe longer, I can't remember, but where I was talking about when you learn to access either past lives or the Akashic records or whatever, and you start to see yourself as a soul and you encounter your other past lives and you realize like, wow, even though I might have died a horrible death, I didn't end. That was not the end of me. It was the end of that incarnation and that set of timeline probabilities and possibilities. And yet I go on. And so death isn't really the thing that we need to avoid. It's more like the subtlety of what we are projecting onto the thing that we are experiencing through that death process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's more about the energetic imprint of what you're doing or what's occurring. Because even if as you're talking about the guy who was carrying out those, the slaughterhouse, I very much take a similar approach still, even with these lantern flies, which arguably are less energetically conscious is the wrong word, less energetically aware than an animal would be. And I still take that same process of like getting to a place of calmness, asking like, all right, like making sure I'm banishing all darkness. I'm literally like, because I know I've heard multiple times, it's like you can say, okay, if you're of darkness, don't talk to me, only things of light. And that's like a fundamental rule in the universe where only beings of light, God specifically in my case, is able to talk to you. And so even before I go and kill one, I'll take a second at least and just be like, hey, are we still doing this? Am I still supposed to kill this thing? And so far it's always been a yes. And so I'm on board with that sacred process of, don't carry, it's like the energy that you carry things out with as opposed to the action itself. And that's a huge piece of the karmic imprint that gets left on you or gets left on the world because of the actions that you're taking.
Totally. Yeah. I really believe that that is true. And again, like it's a dicey topic because then, you know, somebody might listen and extrapolate and assume that maybe we mean something like, oh, you know, whatever the means justify the end, or the end justifies the means, and, you know, the greater good, and all those kind of philosophies can be absolutely warped and taken in the wrong direction. It really is about the state of, you know, that we are, the state we're embodying when we do something, even more so, I think, than the intention behind it. It's like the state. Like, am I doing this in a state of love and freedom and peace? And I don't know. I'm like just reaching for words, but not really feeling them at the moment, versus a state of thinking that I am, I don't know, like here
Holier than thou.
to control things, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, for example, so I used to be a midwife. So I used to work in the medical field, and in Ontario, Canada, where I live, midwives are primary care providers. So that means we are the same as being a doctor, but we only specialize in like a healthy, normal pregnancy. If it becomes high risk, then we transfer care or share care with a specialist obstetrician. But my point is, like, it's not, I know in the States, in certain states, it's like this, like, sort of like hippie, unregulated thing. In Canada, it's very regulated, very, very integrated in the medical system. And the majority, well, everything that we do in that industry is to prolong life. It's to guarantee life and save life. And as somebody who lost the life of her son, I say that I see the destructive effects of that philosophy. It is not, it's because it's coming from fear. So we aren't prolonging life out of a state of benevolence. In fact, we are villainizing death from a state of fear. And it is causing very negative effects. And people don't really usually want to talk about that because, you know, nobody wants to make room for the reality of, you know, mothers and babies dying.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off here, but it felt like there was a small shift there, and maybe it's just because I've been listening to other podcasts you've been on. But are we starting to touch into transhumanism? Is that what you're talking about here?
I mean, it does absolutely lead into transhumanism. That wasn't what I was meaning, but it does lead into that. It's the same kind of philosophy, the idea, and you can see it at end of life care as well, or the way that we, like, the objective is always for somebody to live. Like, we've determined that the prolonging of life is victory and death is defeat. And that is not actually, that's not true. That's coming from our ego fear.
So it's like a quantity over quality perspective.
Yeah. And so specifically in like mother and baby care, if one takes action that we rationalize as like, this is necessary in order to save the life of, it's usually the baby, but sometimes it's the mom. But the action is coming from a state of fear. I have seen and witnessed and sadly participated in events from that scenario that I can see the damage that it's causing damage to the mother, to the father, to the baby. And nobody wants to talk about that damage because all we want to do is pat ourselves on the back and be like, oh my God, oh, thank God we were there. The baby lived. And then we're just like, sink or swim, like, have fun with that trauma that no one's ever going to acknowledge, and you're going to get gaslit about forever, and you're going to feel postpartum depression and not know why, and everybody's going to be like, but at least you have a healthy baby. You know, it's very, very destructive. Whereas, and I think that this is like for people who work in hospice care, end of life care, who like hold space for the natural death process, they understand that sometimes the thing that is the most loving is to accept an inevitable outcome and bring the most amount of reverence to it as possible, you know, or at least hold space for death being something that we don't have to avoid and be afraid of forever, as if any of us can bypass it.
Are you able, because I think you lost me a little bit whenever you started talking about like the babies, are you able to provide an abstract example of what you're referring to?
Yeah, sure. So if there's the perception that a birth is going to be like a risky kind of birth, so let me think. So if there is, let's say a woman has a history of giving birth to large babies, so 10 pounds and up, that's pretty big for a newborn baby, but women do it. I've seen them do it naturally. So it's definitely possible, but in hospitals, it's perceived that that is dangerous. And there, of course, are risks associated with it. And I'm not trying to deny that. But what happens in the hospital typically, but it can also happen at home births with midwives as well, is that the the doctors, the nurses, like all the medical staff, they go into it thinking this bad outcome, this like high risk outcome that could cause, a trauma to the baby or a death to the baby or something like that is of greater likelihood here. So we're going to mentally prepare for it. And as we mentally prepare for it, we are unknowingly going to stack the chips in that direction so that and we are going to take physical action. Like, I'm not just talking about manifesting it, I'm talking about taking physical action that increases the likelihood that a traumatic outcome is going to occur. And then we're going to participate in what would have probably been unnecessary resuscitation of a baby, causing trauma to the baby, separating the mom and the baby, causing trauma to the mom and the dad. And then we're going to put the baby in the special care nursery for a period of observation because that's the protocol following a resuscitation and prolonging the separation of mom and baby. And we're never going to talk about the amount of damage that we caused. Instead, we're going to self-congratulate because we saved the day. But actually, we caused the whole fucking thing, most likely. Like, there's a situation. Specifically, what I'm referring to, there's a situation called shoulder dystocia. So it can happen with any size of baby, but it tends to happen more commonly with big babies. But basically, it's where so if you think of a baby coming out of the mom's birth canal, one of the babies come out sideways. So there's a bottom shoulder that comes out like closer to her bum, and there's a top shoulder that comes out closer to her pubic bone. Sometimes that top shoulder won't be like rolled in enough and it'll get hooked on the pubic bone. So the head is born, but as you try to guide the baby out, it's getting hooked on and we learn that there's only so many minutes that this situation can go on for before brain damage starts to occur. And it fills you with so much panic that you're the one, as the midwife or the doctor or the nurses, you're on the hook for the outcome of this baby's life. So I'm not trying to disparage the character or the intentions of any medical staff who go through these situations. Also, they experience trauma all the time and then go to work the next day without any opportunity to digest and integrate that trauma. So if you think that there's a big baby coming and you think there's a chance that there's going to be a shoulder dystocia, I've seen it happen so many times where then the doctor changes their approach and they, rather than just letting the baby be born, they kind of start pulling on the baby, which then interrupts the natural process that wants to happen, potentially creates a shoulder dystocia, or maybe it was just a big fucking baby and it was going to take an extra minute to come out. And then automatically we assume, oh my God, it was a shoulder dystocia. If the baby doesn't start crying within 15 seconds, we have to clamp and cut the cord and take the baby over to the warmer and start resuscitating it to get it to breathe right away.
Wow.
And yeah, those situations all cause a lot of collateral damage, and we just don't ever discuss it. So prolonging life from a place of fear, the whole reason I started talking about it, the prolonging life from a place of fear can be more destructive than facilitating death from a place of acceptance and love. It's not really about life or death. It's about the state within which we meet it.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think you probably even see that in regards to many things, but even just trying to live an extra day or just trying to do things that are going to live an extra day. And, and this is kind of where I see it as just a quality versus quantity thing. It's like Would you rather live one day of the greatest day of your entire life, or 100 years of just misery and pain and torture? It's like, sign me up for the one day. Like, if those are the two options, why would I try to have the worst possible thing? But, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different elements that come into this, hospital situation, that it's easier for me to say than it does
Yes.
for, yeah. Do you feel like there's things that could be done within the hospital space that would correct this, or at least get us a little bit closer to something that might be a little bit more calming as opposed to destructive?
I honestly don't think so, because it's so ingrained in the system, because basically what everybody ultimately fears, I mean, of course they do genuinely fear the death of a baby or the death of a mother or some kind of, outcome that is going to cause just devastating grief to a family. But what they ultimately are acting out of is the fear of litigation, because that's how the system is set up. And so every single action you're taking is about covering your butt. Everything you're doing, it's impossible not to. And that was a rude awakening for me when I went into midwifery, because I went in all like naive and thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to help people have like the best birth possible. And there were so many times that I had to watch my hands doing something that I knew was not in the highest support of the highest health of everybody. For example, preparing a medication that I knew was not going to make things better for anyone, but that the protocol required me to do it. And if I didn't do that, and if I didn't do that and there was any kind of bad outcome, like it all would have fallen on me. Like everybody is looking with a fine tooth comb through the history of what happened to find the person to point the finger at. So that's the whole entire culture of it. And it applies to everybody. And I just don't think that there are any changes that can be made unless that is completely eradicated. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, it sounds to me almost as if we need to find a way to divorce the money from the healthcare institution, but at the same point, it seems very difficult given the natural state of the world in regards to healthcare. Like,
and
go ahead.
the perception of that, like the perception that a doctor, it most often manifests with a doctor, but like that the doctor somehow has godlike powers to help you avoid death. Do you know what I mean? Like it's about money, but I think a lot of the times when people sue, it's because they're in so much pain and they think that somebody should have done something different. But everybody's just a human. Like in that sense, we're not God, we have a connection to God, but we aren't the ones as our individual ego selves. We aren't the deciders of who lives and dies. And when we try to do that kind of thing, it doesn't usually go very well. So, I think that's a big part of it too, is sort of like we are trained to believe that all babies should live and all mothers should live. And if that's not the case, it's because somebody did something wrong.
So in regards to this idea of that we don't have say or control over, at least let's say, our life, like when we die, when we live, whenever you've worked with the Akashic records, what level of control do we have in planning, let's say, our life in regards to how long we live or what we're going to experience or who we're being born to? Do we have control over that or none at all?
Yeah, so I found something super interesting. It seems to me that there are two different types of incarnations or types of souls. So the first one is the one that we're typically more familiar with, and I call them loopers. And it involves the karmic wheel that a lot of us have heard about. I'm just trying to think about how to approach it, because there's all these like understanding that I have that I don't know if everybody would understand it. But so what it looks like to me is that the way that this place is supposed to work is that we would totally plan out our incarnation, like every aspect of it. And then we would come in and have the incarnation. And then when we die, we completely leave this realm, this game. And we, I don't know, chill out till we're ready to incarnate again, wherever, as whomever, and we decide all that again. So we would have free passage and free will to decide all of it and then live it out from the human perspective here. But what I see happens is that I call it oh my gosh, I haven't used this term in a while, I'm realizing, so I'm kind of forgetting what it was. Oh yeah, it's like a frequency net. There's a frequency net over top of Earth, so to speak, that prevents souls from actually leaving and holds us at a lower frequency of consciousness so that we don't do this ascending stuff and remembering that we are the lucid dreamer within the dream, and we don't ever self-actualize to that degree of power and co-create with God in the way that we are designed to do. And so we live these lives, and they are they're very traumatic. They're very painful. There's a lot of pain. There's like physical body pain. There's relationship pain. There's personal ego pain. There's heartbreak. There's all the layers of pain that coincide with all of our chakras, a lot of trauma and a lot of false programming. And if we're at a certain level of unconsciousness, then when we die, if we are deeply identified with those stories, it creates a density to our our soul consciousness, I guess, where we can't pass through that frequency net. And whatever leftover charge, emotional charge, and sort of like theme or pattern was like remained at the point when we die, it's still alive in us. So then we just, we kind of leave an incarnation. And I do believe that we go to like a peaceful place within the fourth dimension, like within the astral, like there are layers of the astral as well. But we never actually get out of the astral, and we just loop back into another incarnation that, rather than picking the features and designing an incarnation intentionally that would serve us, it's like we loop back into an incarnation that is set up to have a similar emotional charge and similar themes. And that's kind of the karmic wheel. And we have to hopefully we eventually figure it out so that we can approach those traumatic situations with more consciousness and liberate ourselves from it's kind of like being in a hell loop, basically. And I perceive that most of the people who are incarnated are loopers. So that's the experience they're having. Then I see another group of souls, and I think this is what is often referred to as star seeds, but I don't know that it necessarily has to be souls that come from a different planet or whatever. But it appears to me that somehow we're outside of this construct. And so we're not stuck within that frequency net. And we choose to come in to try and raise the frequency of consciousness here. And I call those souls drip downs, because it's like they have an outie and then they choose a portion of their energy to come in as an innie. And usually they orchestrate multiple incarnations for themselves at a time. And so it's almost more like parallel lives than past lives. Like they're living these different incarnations all at the same time with the same soul consciousness, but it will happen at different points in the human historical timeline.
Whoa. How do you know if you're living parallel lives at this time?
I guess I would say that the hallmark thing for me is like when I think about loopers, most of the people who come for Akashic readings with me are not loopers. They are drip downs, but sometimes they can be loopers, and one is not better than the other at all. It's more like some of us kind of got, it really does feel like some of us got trapped here and some of us came from outside to spring the trap. But loopers are usually really, they feel fragmented. Like they feel like they can't remember a lot of themselves. They don't have a lot of memory. And the reason I hesitate is because I'm like, I also don't want to make anybody think that if they can't remember their past lives, that must mean that they're loopers or something like that and that they're trapped here. Like, I don't want to instill fear. This is just my English language way of trying to explain patterns that I see. But like loopers, almost like there's so much energy behind the patterns that they're playing out. Those patterns are very hard to break. They can be broken for sure. But like I think about, our parents or our grandparents who are still doing the same thing that they've been doing for 20 years, watching The Price is Right, playing bingo, chain smoking, like that kind of thing. And they're like complaining about the same pattern that has been happening forever, as if they don't have any control over it. And the reason they don't isn't because their soul is immature. It's because they have been fragmented through so many lifetimes of trauma that they are disconnected from the wholeness of their consciousness. So it's harder for them to remember the continuity of themselves and their multiple lifetimes and how powerful they are. They just feel very identified with who they are in this life and the pattern that they're living out. Whereas the drip downs, a lot of the time they do carry a lot of galactic energy or starseed energy. Like there is just something about them that feels like not entirely from this earth, or they're carrying, I don't know, like I use all those terms with a big grain of salt, but like they're carrying information or experience or memory from, I'll call it elsewhere, a different video game. And they have more of a knack to have spontaneous recall or like achieve states of transcendence, even if it's in bite-sized chunks, kind of like you were describing with your process of reading this book and cultivating your peace. Like that is an indication of a drip down soul. Like there is a part of you that's outside of here. So your buy-in to the illusion of this place is less intense than it is for a looper. But it's not because you are better. You're anchored in more of a frequency of absolute truth, and the loopers got stuck here. So they're anchored in more of like the illusion, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Maybe the piece of it that I'm having trouble with is, I guess, whenever we're making classifications, it invites in separation. So whenever that's probably the issue that I'm having with it, which is, let me take one more step back. It's interesting because I remember reading Dolores Cannon, and when she talks about incarnations, her site, like she would put people in deep trances, for those who don't know, and then she would walk people into a past life, have them die, and then go into the afterlife, and then she would use her hypnosis sessions to basically map out the astral plane. Her definition of it, which I kind of always just ran with, was that you have certain missions or things you want to get done in this life, and then you go into this like almost simulator with a bunch of screens around you, kind of like at the end of the Matrix, whenever like all those screens are circling, and you can see which lives align with the missions that you're trying to carry out. You then pick a life, and then that's when you incarnate. However, I just got to a point where I found Paramahansa, who was talking about incarnations, and his was more describing. So first of all, I would say that that's probably more close to your drip downs. And then Paramahansa was talking about how what he would call probably more closer to your loopers. But see, they're both saying it as in terms of this is everybody. So Paramahansa was more like, the carnation wheel. So when we incarnate, we still have the same energy in which we left our last incarnation, and we just bring that into the next one. And we kind of just essentially have that looping mechanism until we find the salvation. We no longer have egoic desires, and then we move on to the astral plane, where essentially the same process plays out. So where it gets interesting now is that you're bringing in this new conundrum of both of them being true, in my opinion, my interpretation of what's being said. But so then that makes it difficult for me to understand because I would kind of just take the assumption that we're maybe that's not fair. Maybe we're okay. What I was going to say is I would take the assumption that we're all able to experience both, but at that same, or we would experience the same thing. But at that same time, my mind is saying, well, we're deviated so far away from source that we can still experience that separation or those differences in the incarnation process. So that felt like a whole bunch of word vomit right there. But I guess my difficult nature, right? I can feel my ego. It's like, yeah, I'm a drip down. But then there's the like maybe a more calm place where I'm like, it feels off to think that there would be like these two different ways of incarnating. It's like whenever people talk about NPCs, it's like hard for me
Yeah,
to jump on board with it because I'm like, well, they have the power to
me
do it,
too.
but is it just a frequency thing? Is it people that are, just at a different frequency in their journey? Like where I feel like there's something I'm missing here. Are you able to help me with that?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And like also I feel the same way. I've never met an NPC. Like I totally understand what people are talking about when they are referring to the concept. I've never met one. Everybody I have met has a soul. Is that because that's my own projection? Very possibly. But I've never met somebody that I'm like, you're just empty, like you're just a background character.
Yeah.
And I feel like who the fuck am I to
Yeah.
say that about anybody anyway? So I agree with you. I guess another way to think about it so that we don't bring in that separation and that sense of like some of us are like we're the heroes, we're the rescuers, and we're coming to rescue the downtrodden pathetic ones that can't get out of here, um, would be like if you, Clayton, who I'm speaking to right now, if you are a drip down and you've come in here from outside and you're living out maybe like 5 or 6 or 7 different incarnations all at the same time through different time periods, it could be that the one that you're coming to rescue is the looper aspects of yourself that got stuck here. So you're like on a soul retrieval mission to like you are almost like you are the Christ bridge that is coming to shepherd the lost pieces of yourself back home.
That makes sense, but that's a lot. Because it makes sense because the way that I've been starting to view the world, especially in regards to what I've been being taught by Paramahansa, which is, we're all these divine sparks. We're all these fractals of God. And we then get encased in a causal body, which gets encased in an astral body, and then gets encased in a physical body, which is what we're experiencing right now. So if you go back up that entire chain of command, we're all from the same original source.
Mm-hmm. Which includes the dark players, right? Like this was a huge, I went through such an intense dark night of the soul in November and December of last year. It like, holy moly, I felt like I got crushed by it. It was so intense. And it was just like, I got cookie crumb fed by my higher self, I would say, a bunch of things that walked me deeper into like the really dark underbelly of this realm that we're in. Things I already knew about, like cults, the occult, child sacrifice, pedophilia, like really dark stuff that I knew about, but it's almost like I was guided to look at it more closely and find a way to be at peace and at the same time acknowledge like what I would term it as an abomination, and anybody that desecrates like the purity of a child or a baby, but also even anybody, because we all carry that child or baby within us. It seems like an abomination to me. So it was like I was having to hold intense duality within myself. And the thing, and I was also really deeply examining like Christ and trying to understand Christ on a deeper level. So it made sense that I got led down that because Christ is like the light, and there then is a darkness, right? That those things want to be reconciled together. So a vision that I kind of received to help me understand it was, it was like being guided down into, I don't know, like maybe like a cave or an underground lair, and it had like a staircase, a spiral staircase that was carved out of stone all the way down the edge of, like, is a cylindrical drop into an underground layer. And anyway, and it felt like I was being taken on an astral journey by Christ. And I was walking behind Christ down these stairs. And as I could get, like, we got deeper down the stairs, the energy of the pain and the suffering was so overwhelming. And yet Christ never wavered in his peace. All he emanated was like peace and mercy and acceptance and love. And when we got to the bottom, it was like I was being shown what, I don't know, another understanding of what redemption means. And there were people there representing the darkest darkness that were hurting, basically were hurting other humans and hurting children. And what he said was, anybody and everybody who is ready to leave this nightmare behind is now welcome. And that was it. It was all players. It was the victims and the victimizers, and they were of equal value. And some of them came, and we just walked back up the stairs, and he just brought those who were ready out of the nightmare back into, I assume that the end place, because I just went to the surface, and then, there was like almost like a transmutation. It is back into the, like almost like the illusion being dissolved back into the wholeness, the oneness of everything. And that was really powerful to me to see that, because it helped me to understand something I was grappling with, which is that sense of separation. And like, I felt very hung up on, like, I know there are people here doing nefarious things, and that there are probably other beings that aren't necessarily human that are also doing nefarious things. And yet, where do they fit in all of creation? Like, if this is all God, like, where do they fit? How does this fit? What am I supposed to do with this? And that was the answer to that question, which is like, we are all God. All of every single piece is equally precious and valued and loved. And, there is, at the end of the day, what it honestly felt like, and people might take issue with this, but what it felt like to be in that experience was that there was no need to mete out some horrible form of justice or vengeance for the suffering that occurred, but that the process of choosing to return to the light would involve its own, I don't know, say if we think about every soul that has done something terrible to somebody else, it's kind of like what we hear when people report like life reviews, almost like you have to pass through this veil of the accumulation of everything that you have participated in and feel it in order to return. And honestly, I think that's the heart. I think the heart is the key to everything. And the heart is that passageway back into the light, and it's like the portal out of the nightmare whenever we're ready to take it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because even from, let's say, a chakra perspective, the lower frequencies are like safety, fear, groundedness attached to this earthly possession. But then once you move through the heart, it becomes about truth, seeing the astral, being connected to the divinity. So there's definitely a parallel in terms of, I'm trying to say chakras now. I feel like that's the appropriate way to say it. So I'm trying to say chakras. Yeah. It sounds cool too. But I find that interesting. But from your experience or vision, whatever, however you want to deem it. Christ, what did you say? Christ said that whoever wants to come can now join me. Is that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
So how does this
Mm-hmm.
play into the idea of karma then? Is it that even, I mean, I guess, and maybe this is not like the message, right? The message you got from it was that everybody is able to find salvation. Everyone can be redeemed. But it struck me as though they didn't need to play out their own karma. Is that a separate lesson that wasn't brought to you, or is that somehow woven into this?
I think that's what I mean when I don't think I articulate it well because it all blends together. I don't want to talk forever, but when I talk about moving through the portal of the heart and passing through that veil of the accumulated, it's like the emotional felt bank of everything we have participated in. So like, I don't know about, I think maybe I first read about this in Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls, but I can't remember because it's been a long time since I've read those. But some people share about like a life review experience at the end of their lives where as they are seeing everything, it's like when they are released from the physical body, they suddenly get almost like 360-degree vision where they relive their whole life, but from the perspective of everyone involved. And some people have described it as being like excruciating. And like there are moments when, like when you just said something mean to somebody as a kid on the playground, and it seemed like fairly inconsequential, like something you're not proud of, but also not like the biggest deal in the world. But you feel how that landed with the other person and the ripple effect that it created. It feels like that, like as we were passing up through it, it was like to return to salvation means that you completely feel everything that you participated in, but that liberates you from the process of the karmic wheel, because that's the whole point of the karmic wheel anyway, it's like you're doing it in slow motion versus just passing through this one like prolonged but temporary moment of like blinding intensity of everything you participated in while you were immersed in the illusion.
Man, the thoughts that are kind of coming to me is like thinking about that place of being if you're like a truly malevolent person who has carried out destruction on the world. Like, again, bringing back my man Paramahansa, he talks about how like right when you die, you can experience like you experience either a nightmare or you can experience like a very blissful dream, which is kind of that recollection process. And yeah, I mean, I could only it's very, and maybe there's a piece of us that, past the anger, if you will, that's like just feels so bad for these souls that have carried out such malevolent forces on the world, and to think that they'd be trapped in a nightmare that's, they energetically have to feel all of the things that they did. Like I can't, it's kind of hard for me to even just mentally comprehend like some of the, let's say the top aggressors in those realms, like what they would possibly have to experience once getting to that place of, call it judgment, getting to that final place. Like that would be, that's heavy just to think about. That's heavy for me just to think about. And then for someone to actually have to go through it is like a whole nother story.
I mean, I think that's why we see it going the way that it's going in like our world, in our dimensional bandwidth that we occupy as humans, because I think that those players who have played those very dark roles, a lot of them are like, fuck that. I do not ever want to feel that. And I think that's what the darkness is too, is like the extreme ego that is choosing separation and like choosing, it's like, no, I will live forever and I will become like God and you have no, like, that kind of egomaniacal insanity. And so some of them are like clinging to it. But I perceive that there are a lot of people who are wrapped up in the darkness who are suffering horribly and really, really, I don't want to say like, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, poor them or anything like that. But just, I just acknowledge that it takes a humongous toll. It is the complete opposite of what we actually are, to play those roles and play them for a prolonged period of time. And when I tune into those things, I feel a lot of suffering and a lot of remorse, kind of like when we hear about people who, get recruited into gangs and then they just want to leave the gang so badly, but they feel like, how can I, like the price is too high. I'm in too deep, like that.
Yeah, I think it's, no, it's certainly difficult because I'm sure there are people who may or may not listen to this, but there's certainly an energy of, wanting those people being like, oh no, it's so great that they get to suffer for all the things that they did. But, it seems that it comes back to that place of calm and compassion and peace. And maybe that's even how Jesus was able to attain Christ consciousness, is being able to be in that place. He was strung up, he was tortured for all intents and purposes for doing nothing wrong other than speaking truth, and then had to carry a cross forever, and then, was humiliated, and then eventually died. And one of his last words were, forgive them for what they not know what they do. And it's like, man, like that level of compassion. I mean, it makes sense that so many people look up to him and see him as like the figure, because it's like, I mean, I can't say I'd have that level of compassion if I was put through the ring like that. But, maybe that's, it comes back, I think, and maybe this is a beautiful thing, right? Is it comes back to what your vision was experiencing with him going down into that dark place, and how you're feeling all this terribleness, and yet all of this terrible energy that you're feeling around you, and he's still sitting there in this place of calmness, in this place of peace, in this place of bliss, just not allowing the external environment to harm his internal environment.
Yeah, like coming back to that sort of eye of the hurricane analogy, like he was so deeply connected to the absolute truth of the highest love, that is the highest light, that is God, that even going down into the darkest places where the most awful forms of the illusion play out, he knew it was an illusion and that it's optional, and that all of the participants could leave whenever they're ready, and that there is a way out, and it's to pass back through the heart and back up to God. That's what it felt like. And I think too, like, I mean, this is a hard one to articulate, but the dark players are us, just like the loopers are us. And so if we identify with being a drip down, it's not because we're better. It's because there's a part of us that likewise exists outside of all of this illusion, that is like ready to come and invite those lost pieces back. And so the dark players, like it's I think it's a really important thing for anybody who identifies as a light worker or an indigo or a starseed or a wayshower or whatever, labels we put on it to describe the feeling of, like Dolores Cannon says, being here on a mission to bring higher consciousness. It's very important that we don't get caught in the ego trap of believing that our shit don't stink, and believing that we are, that makes us better and we're somehow above the darkness. I think that we are the cleanup crew, and we're here because this mess is ours. But I also don't say that from a place of like, back in the conversation earlier, you were talking about how there is a prevailing belief that whether it's a majority of belief or not, I agree. There's a lot of people who perceive that human beings are a plague on the earth and we should be eradicated. And I think that that's an extreme, sort of, it's like a warping of that acceptance that we are, like, this is our mess. This is our mess to clean up. But that doesn't mean that we deserve to all be wiped out and die. There's so much beauty to us as well. And we're the ones that get to choose. Are we going to highlight the beauty, or are we going to highlight the darkness and the mess? And we also get to clean up the mess. As like, I think that's also why so many of us are being called to do that really deep introspective work and shadow work and clearing out our trauma, working with our nervous system, using things like breath work, the Akashic records to more deeply understand ourselves, meditation practices, yoga, like you name it, right? Those are all just modalities or practices that we can use because we feel truly, genuinely guided inside of ourselves to clean up the mess. And we all have shadow. We all have things that we deeply regret. And it's like, I remember also this point where I realized, well, I am of the belief, I mean, I don't want to go too deeply into politics either, but I'll just name drop here. I had a really intense dream that really hammered it home for me once, which again, I don't feel like was a dream. I feel like it was a remote viewing astral experience. But I believe that Hillary Clinton is one of the, is a very dark actor, very involved with very, very dark things. And I had this realization around the same time last year that I had the experience with Christ, where I was like, I cannot honestly say that if I were to walk through her life in her shoes, that I would be any different. Do you know what I mean? Like, and this isn't giving her a hall pass to, or anybody, like we don't have to make it about her, but it's not giving people a hall pass to just do whatever they want without considering the suffering it creates for others. But it's more realizing, like, again, it's not like my shit doesn't stink. It's not like I'm just such an evolved person that I am completely above any kind of dark action. It's something that I'm working on cultivating all the time and actively choosing all the time. But I have regrets in my past, just like anybody else. I have said those throwaway comments to people, or I've done things that, I deeply regret and wish isn't what I did. I wish it wasn't my choice. It was a reflection of the level of consciousness I was at. But it can go so much darker. If I was literally like guided and groomed toward a path of darkness, I very well could be acting out that path of darkness and could be one of the people that others are referring to. So to me, it feels like that helps me at least to dissolve that sense of separation as well, to be like, it's all just us. Like, if we are characters within the dream of a great dreaming mind, like when you have a bad dream and there's a villain that's doing something like hurting somebody you love, and you wake up, you realize the villain was a piece of your own consciousness.
Yeah. It's a difficult thing to wrestle with.
It is. It is.
Even at my stage in my evolutionary process, it's a difficult piece of the puzzle because it really, I think what makes it difficult is this feeling that comes with it to have to or want to do something about it, which is difficult because if it goes back to earlier in the conversation, there's only so much we can do, which is protecting our inner peace. So do you feel like that there's a level of, they say ignorance is bliss, but I also think that there's a level of being, wisdom is bliss. Huh. Because it feels to me like if you get to a place where you know enough, you can be at a place of bliss as well. I don't know if there's a question here, but an interesting realization maybe that I just came to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but maybe you have to struggle through that ignorance. It's almost like ignorance isn't really bliss. Ignorance brings about pain, but you're just ignorant to why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I think about the people like in my personal life who I would say are still in a state of blissful unawareness, at this point, they are definitely actively choosing that unawareness. Like they are more aware right now that they're deliberately being like this and have their fingers in their ears. And again, it's like a fragile piece, right? Like it's a piece that is fragile. It can be broken by the things that we're observing outside and experiencing in life. And I agree with you that like to be ignorant doesn't mean you're happy necessarily. There's some kind of bliss because you are unaware of how much power you have in your own situation, but then there is a lot of pain. Like I think we all live with a lot of pain and trauma, even if we came from the best childhood. We've all had painful experiences, and that that pain, if you're ignorant, you don't know where that pain is or how to find it or how to fix it. And that's a pretty, I think most people live that way. And I mean, I would never go back to it. I don't want to live that way anymore.
I figured it out to this point. We're good. We're going to move past that, right? But this is actually bringing up something I brought up earlier, an article that I found. I have found it. I don't know if this is the one that I saw, so I haven't read it through, but it's like nurse reveals the top 5 regrets people make on their deathbed. So maybe this is actually a way that we can bring us back to something actionable that we're able to look at. So number 1, I wish I had I wish I'd had. Yeah, we're going back to that bad grammar. When we write, maybe we can't do the bad grammar, but number 1, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. This was the most common regret of all. When people realize that their life is almost over and look back clearly on it, it is easy to see how many dreams have gone unfulfilled. Most people had not honored even half of their dreams and had to die knowing that it was due to choices they had made or not made. That's crazy. Especially whenever we break that down from like our perspective here of like saying that this is a dream world, and then we have like dreams within the dream that we want to act out, and it leaves us with this place of unfulfilling our dreams within the dream. Wow, now I feel like I'm taking this to a place of inception, but but is there like, do you feel like there's a corollary here with like unfulfilled dreams and reincarnation of like, if we don't complete things, we need to come back and do them again?
Definitely. I definitely perceive that there is like that's a big motivator, and that can be one of those themes I was talking about, those energetic themes that like if you die and it was in your heart to like be something, fulfill something, then you can get pulled back into an incarnation where you have another opportunity to express that. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because most of the reason that we don't pursue those is because or a lot of the reason I think that motivates a lot of people is we're afraid of other people's judgment. And then when you think about it and you look at it and you're like, wait, that person was totally like traumatized and asleep themselves. Like why did I hold myself back because of the opinions of somebody who is also unhappy?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a huge thing too, is just realizing like, do you really, I don't know, maybe this is just like an energetic thing, but like paying attention to whose value or like whose judgment you're placing weight on. And I know it's a lot easier said than done, but after my TikTok and Instagram have blown up, I've seen plenty of comments, but being able to filter out which ones are coming from a place of genuine curiosity and which ones are coming from a place of like, hey, my life's actually not going that well, so I'm going to lash out on this comment stage of this post. Coming to that realization has definitely helped me a lot in truly embodying what I'm trying to go for in life. And people who either align with that message or don't, which is totally cool. But at the end of the day, it's like you're going to help more people by aligning with that thing as opposed to cowering away from it.
100%. 100%. It's interesting. Do you receive a lot of like trolly angry comments?
I haven't posted a lot recently, but yeah, I mean, so my TikTok specifically, because have you gone to the book, by the way? That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Yes, I
What are your
have.
thoughts?
Yes. Oh, I
Yeah.
love it.
Fuck
I
yeah.
love it. Yeah.
Awesome. We don't have to make this a whole a promo for the book right now, but on the TikTok is what got me started on actually writing that book. It was because you read it, but for those who might not know, I found the Gospel of Thomas and then started, dissecting it on TikTok. And that was the first exposure I had to like a massive video going viral. And I mean, the comments, I mean, being told that you're a heretic or you're a demon worshiper, or, Christ is the only thing, the Bible's the only thing that you need to know, can be very painful. It's a very painful experience.
Mhm.
But the beauty of it is that it's really shown me a lot of the cracks within the church, within Catholicism, within Orthodox Christianity, of the incongruencies that have been perpetuated by the church, not taught by Jesus, might I say. I want to add that very clearly. Not that Jesus taught them, but the way that things have been interpreted or misconstrued, accidentally or purposely. I'm not going to say either way, but maybe some of it was purpose, maybe some of it was accident. But it's very fascinating to see, people that are just regurgitating of things, or like when you start seeing the same comment over and over again, you're like, okay, you start realizing where there's like a a theme, right? Like, are you really thinking for yourself if this is the same
Yeah.
comment that I've seen 5 times again? And so it really invites me to be like, like, it's weird because it's super empowering at the same time to be like, okay, the fact that this comment keeps coming up tells me that people aren't actually thinking about this issue. It's just something that they've been taught to believe and have been conditioned to believe, and they're just going to keep regurgitating it and repeating it. So there's like something here to specifically go to and act on or talk about. And, especially, I think, especially whenever I hear the comment, the one that's coming to mind right now as an example, is the Bible's the only book you need. Any other books are heretical and it's not the word of Jesus. Meanwhile, it's like, dude, this is not in accordance with what he teaches, right? Don't judge others. Don't,
Mhm.
cast judgment. Like, that was a big one. Actually, I got that one recently. That's a big one, especially touching on judgment, which is like, I looked at the your YouTube page, and you're going down a very dark path of new age spiritualism, which will not help you, and you will need to be saved from it. To which I replied, like, and again, this is a very powerful point. Make sure you're in a place of calmness when you reply to these things, because I can very much feel like my anger wanting to tell him off. I know he's wrong, but coming back to a place of calmness and just being like, look, I'm happy to have a conversation with you about Jesus, but I'm not going to be doing it whenever you're sitting here with just a word vomit of something that doesn't make sense at all and casting judgment on my viewpoint. Probably nothing about me if that's your comments that you're making. So if you're going to bring this up in the future, like, actually have something you're talking about. Don't just label everything I'm doing as being dark and, new age spiritualist. And so I bring all of this up because, the mass programming. Is that why I brought this up? Was the mass programming? I feel like there was something else.
I think so. Well, but I mean, I asked you if you get a lot of those kind of comments, and I think that's what you were talking about. And you were talking about like, yeah, hearing the same kind of themes regurgitated over and over and over, which indicates to me, it indicates that there's a massive crown chakra
Yeah.
trauma
Oh, and this
playing
ties
out.
back into human design too, which is amazing. Oh, crown chakra. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, but it's tying back into my human design, where like my mission here is like a heretical investigator. So my job is to like pay attention to like the big picture items, like don't hold people responsible. Like, I can see, and I know there are people who go after individuals, but mine is more to look at like the overall structure of things, and then like, pick them out and be like, okay, like, this is a common thing that people keep saying. Let's dive into it and talk about why this is misconstrued and where we're off the mark on it.
Are you a 5-1?
I see. I don't know that deep. Maybe. Is that heretical
Okay.
investigator?
I think so. I mean, I'm not a deep human
Okay.
design person either. I was just wondering if that was
Let me
what it
see.
was. Um, the crown chakra trauma, I'll just talk about that while you look it up, is, to me, it is that basically the extremely deep and trauma-based programming that we have received through many generations, through like innumerable cultures, to sever our direct connection with God. I know we talked about this on my podcast too, to the point where you believe that your own interpretation of the word of Christ or any other source of like divine wisdom from other cultures or whatever is not good enough or is dangerous, and so you have to believe in externalized authority of either, you know, like the papacy or the church of any kind, the particular preacher in your church, the Bible, whatever. But it's like, and I'm sure it applies to other religions as well. I just can't speak to them because I don't have personal embodied experience with those other religions. But it's, to me, it, like, I have a past life memory of being alive during the Spanish Inquisition, and it was so dark, and the amount of trauma that was inflicted on people from the church, I can just see the way it ripples out through all these other experiences and cultures and stuff. And the whole point of it was to sever the connection at the crown chakra,
Whoa.
where you are not allowed to trust your own crown. You are not allowed to trust your own connection to the divine. You can't talk directly to God. You have to go through us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a big thing with the church. And that's a big thing that I always point out in my Instagram videos, which is like them putting themselves between you and God. It's like, no, and this is something that Gnostics talk about a lot, which is that divine spark that lives within every single one of us. Therefore, you have a communication line to God. You just got to know how to pick up the phone. And to pick up the phone, we come to calmness. So it's super cool. And then I just looked up to kind of backtrack us to human design. It is a 5-1, and I think it's also hilarious that heretic is in the title of this. So the 5-1 profile in human design is a blend of the 5th line heretic and the 1st line investigator. These individuals, aka me, are characterized by their need to make sense of the world and their ability to influence others through their practical insights and solutions. Understanding the dynamics of this profile can provide valuable insights into how 5-1 profiles navigate their life experiences and relationships. The 5th line, or heretic, is the most transpersonal line in the hexagram. It's about being universal, being for everyone. Those with this line in their profile often feel a calling to be of practical use to others, solving problems and addressing needs. They are naturally seen by others as problem solvers and may often find themselves in situations where they are called to provide practical solutions, which is hilarious because I was a computer engineer for, the first 10, 20 years of my life. The 1st line in this profile, the investigator, adds a foundation of depth and curiosity. It drives the 5-1 profile to understand how things work and how to delve deep into their interests. This line is about getting to the foundations of things, searching for security through knowledge. Whoa, that's funny that it's all about wisdom, that book. In the context of the 5-1 profile, it is this deep understanding that underpins their problem-solving ability. The interaction between the 5th and 1st lines in the 5-1 profile creates an interesting dynamic. The drive to investigate from the 1st line feeds the practical problem-solving ability in the 5th line, and in turn, the recognition and demand from others in the 5th line can steer the focus of the investigation in the 1st line. This cycle can make the 5-1 profile highly effective in roles where deep understanding and practical solutions are needed. However, this profile also comes with its challenges. Because 5th line individuals are often projected upon by others, they may sometimes struggle with unrealistic expectations or misunderstandings. Balancing their need for solitude in the 1st line with the demand of others' 5th line can also be a challenge for 5-1 profiles.
Yeah, totally. I was going to say 5s get projected on a lot because I'm a 2-5. So that's the hermit and the heretic. And that is, we were talking about my Akashic readings right at the very beginning. And I was explaining that I don't desire to do single session readings as my main thing anymore. And that's part of it, because with that 5th line, it's just, we just naturally attract projection. That used to happen to me in my dating life all the time. Like guys would project onto me the kind of girl they thought I was. I mean, we all do that to each other. I was definitely doing that to other people, but it was a pattern. And then they would want me to be that. And if I couldn't be that, I felt like I was failing. But in terms of the Akashic records, it's like, I just, I can see a lot in the Akashic records, but I still only have a human mind. So I can't see the whole. picture all at once. And I don't have every answer for every person. And I just don't think that's how it works. Like, we're all supposed to uncover our own answers. And coming back to that crown chakra thing, like, we each have our own connection to God. So I find that what I'm best at in the Akashic Records is almost like bringing forward like little pieces that activate your own, like your own process of being like, oh my God, and like all the pieces falling into place. And some of it comes through me and my words and what I can see, but I think it's an internal alchemy that I trigger in other people. But it's hard with single sessions. I just found it was very hard energetically for me to brace myself to have people come with an expectation that, I don't know, I don't want to say that they thought I was going to solve all their problems. I don't think that's actually what people were expecting, but just like a lot of something built up, a lot of anticipation. And yeah, it's intense to have a 5 in the profile, to feel like you want, like, exactly, you want more than anything to help people and solve problems and make things better and make yourself available and be of service. And then that feeling of like, but if I let myself be guided too much by that, or if I go in that direction too much, then I become like, I'm trying to meet the expectations that people bring that are unreasonable. So it's kind of, then you have to go back to your other setting where you're kind of like you were saying with the jujitsu as well. Like, I just want to help without tying it up to the perception that like I can fix things or I can solve the problem. It's an interesting profile number to balance.
Oh, I get it. Speaking, I get it. But yeah, I think that's also probably what comes into, and that's probably why patience has been a huge thing for me, at least recently, but just in general, I can feel it. And maybe it's a little bit more difficult for me because, you mix in this, what were the combinations? It's like problem solving. Let me see here. We have the problem solving ability. I want to investigate. I want to have the problem solving ability. And then I'm also trying to balance my demand for others, but then also myself at the same time. So like you combine
Yeah.
all of that. I mean, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm going to deep investigate this. I figure it out. I can solve the problem, right? Like that's kind of, now I'm thinking about it, there's probably an element of that in that book that I wrote, which is to solve this problem of like why we're unable to connect, like truly embody our own Christ consciousness within the church and like how they've deviated from it. And so now that I see the problem, now that I've in asterisk in air quotes solved the problem in a way, it's like now I just need to be patient and let it unfold naturally, as opposed to being like, guys, like here's the answer, like don't call me a heretic anymore, here's the answer. But I think that's where that patience element comes in. Is like, okay, you did your work, take a step back, be patient, and let it unfold as it will.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, like, people, there's a lot to be said for seeds being planted, right? Like, even the people in the comment sections, they could really be strongly clinging to and voicing a fear-based perception that they have because there's fear behind it. But your composure and coming back to them and your willingness to keep sharing the information that resonates as true for you and just offering it as a perspective and being like, I'm not saying that I have the accurate interpretation of Christ. I'm just contributing to
Right.
the discourse. That might plant a seed for them where when they're ready, it opens up a whole avenue that leads them to a greater, I don't know. I don't even want to like project onto them that they are in a bad place, but just advances them on their own journey in whatever direction they
Well, and especially,
are wanting
and
to go.
I think probably another element of this, which is huge, is that calmness piece. Because I'm sure there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, probably majority of people who have been in my situation, past, present, future, would react to a lot of those comments either by disengagement and non-attachment's good either way, but disengagement, or if they do engage, it's going to be from a place of anger or the sympathetic nervous system, which again, as we've talked about, is not a good place to do it. So if I'm able to get myself to a place of calmness and still engage in those conversations, I think that would be super, super beneficial for all of them, and then myself included. Because, it's showing me non-attachment to my ideas. They could be updated, they could become better. And then also it's showing them that there's a calm approach to having the conversation without it needing to go to a place of name calling or judgment. And even more so, now I'm thinking about this, could be providing me with some pretty solid YouTube titles that I can make videos on of just take those words, put it into a YouTube title, and then just talk about the opposite. You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like perfect kind of like clickbait titles that, yeah, pull people in. Then you're like, bam, here's a balanced
Yeah.
perspective.
Here's an example of dark age new spirituality, and then halfway through it I'm like, okay, well, this is why it actually works and why it agrees with all the other religions. Oh wow, that's good. I'm gonna have to remember that. All right, I'll remember it. Yeah, that's cool. Appreciate that. Thanks for helping me out with that, Amy. Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, but it's also cool because I think, and this is where the investigator piece comes in, is that I'm getting to a place now where I'm able to see all these interconnected things that are happening behind the scenes that people usually aren't, in my opinion, looking for. The connection between Jesus, the connection to Paramahansa, the connection with how Dolores Cannon talks about the astral world and reincarnation, how you talk about it in regards to like these drips or loopers, how um, Buddhism talks about it with the incarnation wheel. And so it seems to me that, and this is where I come back to wisdom is bliss, is that there's many different ways to describe like the esoteric natures or questions that we have about reality. And if you can embody that wisdom, you now can operate in the world with bliss and calmness, that no matter how people are going to poke at or question the way you view the world, there's a way that you can articulate it to them that makes sense to them. I think that's just beyond powerful, no matter what line of, whether it's in spirituality or computer engineering, or we're talking about plants. I think that's a very powerful communication ability that everyone and anyone should be able to tap into.
Because it bridges that distance of separation.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
It makes me think of our inherent telepathic abilities, which we've, kind of gotten wobbly on, and we're not super confident in it yet. But and I think we talked about this, yeah, because you offered the analogy of English like chopping carrots, and so I think we went into it a little bit. But like our natural setting for communication is through a telepathy that comes through our third eye, so transmitting like imagery to each other, and telepathy through the heart, so just like feeling each other, and then telepathy through the sacral, which is like being in deep sort of like relationship and presence with each other. And we the way that we have been sort of trained out of that and trained into using language creates an increased sense of separation, because then we're like alone with our ideas, and our ability to communicate our ideas determines how understood and seen and validated we feel. And so for somebody who isn't very good with words, or, especially like I think about people who have stutters or things like that, and they feel very isolated because their throat chakra is, all the pressure is put on the throat chakra to make themselves understood. And yeah, it's like it really amplifies the experience of separation between us to have to rely on English language, or any language for that matter, although I think it's probably different for indigenous languages. Those are probably, they feel to me when I hear them, even if I don't understand what they mean, they feel different in the way that they flow out and the somatic sensations it conjures up within me. But because we are here at this place where we are utilizing language to communicate, I think it is really beautiful when we can find a way to be dexterous enough with words to bridge those gaps of separation and find a meeting place with the other person that we're in conversation with, even if it seems like we have opposing perspectives. Like, to be able to find a way to bridge that is a big triumph.
Yeah.
Feels like a victory.
That's huge. Well, I mean, especially because if it's an energetically charged conversation, your nervous system's going to be activated. So you need to take that time to like just calm it down. And then I'm sure that's what would unlock that little piece that would be able to open you up to see that bigger picture of what's actually unfolding.
Totally. That's it. That's my takeaway from our conversation is like calmness is the key.
Is that going to be the title of this podcast episode? Calmness is the key. But no, it does feel like a great spot to wrap it up. I mean, Amy, I'm beyond grateful for connecting with you in this podcast and our previous podcast on your episode. Let the audience know how they can get in touch with you. I'll have your links down below, but let them know how they can get more Amy in their life. And yeah, if you have any final messages for them, let them know.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And just for sharing this conversation. It was like a beautiful way to spend the afternoon. It was awesome.
Hell yeah.
So you can find me at amybelair.com. I am cosmic.oracle on Instagram, and just know that there are some imposters. I will never send you a DM trying to like give you a shady reading. So just ignore all of those. And you can also find me on my podcast, which is Third Eye Awakening. Clayton was featured. We had an awesome conversation there too. And it's all about spiritual and psychic awakening and just like everything under that like broad umbrella of cool topics. So yeah, those are the places that people can find me. I run a whole plethora of courses teaching people how to read the Akashic Records for themselves, teaching them how to do it as a skill and a service for others and start a business around it, how to activate your psychic abilities and find magic in the darkness and like, your own dark night of the soul experiences. So just check it out.
Hell yeah. Amy, thanks again. Appreciate it. Guys, go check out our podcast. We had an incredible conversation on it. So it's honestly a good spot to start off. And if you don't see it, I guess it's also cool, but we'll definitely have a talk about it whenever we see each other in the 6th dimension.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're out.